The day's work is done, and the light is leaving the sky. You walk across the trampled grass of the camp, past rows of tents that all look the same in the fading glow. The ground is packed hard under your boots from weeks of feet walking the same paths. You find your own tent, a simple wedge of canvas stretched over a ridgepole, its flaps tied back loosely to let the last of the warm air drift inside. You duck through the low opening and stand still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the dim interior. The space is small, just wide enough for a bedroll, a wooden crate, and the few belongings you carry. It smells of dry cotton and dust, and the faint, grassy scent of the straw that fills your mattress sack. Everything is quiet now, quieter than it was an hour ago when the camp still buzzed with the noises of men finishing their duties. The evening is settling over the valley like a slow tide, and you feel it in the softening of the air. You move to the wooden crate that serves as your table and seat. The crate is rough, made of pine boards that have splintered a little at the edges, and it sits against the sloped canvas wall. You lower yourself onto it carefully, feeling the wood creak under your weight, and stretch your legs out in front of you for a moment. Your shoulders relax, dropping away from your ears, and you let out a long, slow breath that you did not know you had been holding. The day's tension, which was never very great but always present, begins to seep out into the cooling air. You reach to the side and pull a small cloth bag toward you, its drawstring loose from many openings. Inside is your paper, folded into neat rectangles, and your pen, a simple wooden holder with a metal nib that you keep wrapped in a scrap of soft leather. You take out a single sheet of paper and lay it on the flat board that you place across your knees, a board worn smooth from use. The paper is a little wrinkled, but it will lie flat enough once you smooth it with the heel of your hand. You press your palm across its surface, feeling the grain of the paper, the tiny ridges that make a soft sound against your skin. Next to you, on the ground, sits a small glass ink bottle with a cork stopper. You lift it and shake it gently, hearing the liquid slosh inside with a thick, quiet sound. The glass is cool, and the ink inside is dark, a deep black that looks almost solid in the dim light. You set the bottle on the crate beside you, within easy reach, and then you reach for your candle, a stub of tallow stuck to a tin plate by its own melted wax. The wick is short and blackened from the last time it burned. You take out your tin box of matches, the kind that strike anywhere, and slide the box open with your thumb. The matches are small wooden splints with red heads, and you select one, careful not to break it. You close the box and hold the match against the rough striking surface on the side. There is a small scratching sound, a rasp, and then a sudden flare of light that makes you squint. The flame catches the wick almost immediately, sputtering a little as it finds the wax, and you let the match burn down between your fingers before blowing it out with a soft puff. The smoke curls up in a thin ribbon, carrying the sharp smell of sulfur, and then the candle settles into its own steady glow. The flame stands up straight and still at first, a pointed teardrop of yellow and blue. The air inside the tent is so calm that it does not waver at all, and you can see the tiny blue heart at its base, the place where the wax vapor meets the air. The light stretches out in a small circle, illuminating your hands, the board, the paper, and the immediate space around you. The canvas walls turn a warm golden brown in the light, and the shadows pool in the corners, deep and soft. You watch the flame for a while, not thinking of anything in particular, just letting the sight of it fill your eyes. The candle gives off a faint, warm smell, a little like the smell of a kitchen where a stew has been cooking, a smell that is both animal and vegetable, the tallow releasing its own quiet perfume as it burns. A very small column of heat rises from the flame, enough to warm the tips of your fingers if you hold them nearby, and you do hold your hand out for a moment, feeling the gentle heat on your palm. The night outside is cool, but here, in this tiny circle, there is a small spot of warmth, a small spot of light that makes the tent feel like a room. You sit quietly and let the light do its work. The day's small noises, which you can still hear faintly beyond the canvas, are fading one by one. A horse stamps its foot far away, a hollow thud on the dry ground, and then is silent. A man's voice calls out something too far to understand. The sound softened into a low murmur that rises and falls and then stops. The clink of a tin cup, the scrape of a shovel, the laugh that fades into a cough, all these sounds are growing less frequent, like the last drops of rain after a storm. You listen without straining, your ears simply receiving the quieting world. The crickets have started their evening rhythm, a steady pulse that seems to come from everywhere at once, and it fills the silence in a pleasant way, not demanding attention, just providing a soft, continuous background. The tent flaps stir in the lightest breath of wind, a faint rustling that sounds like pages turning very slowly. All these things together make a kind of quiet music, a low hum that tells you the day is over and the night has begun in earnest. You turn your attention back to the paper on the board. It is a plain sheet, creamy in color, with no lines, and you will have to write straight by careful habit. The pen lies beside it, and you pick it up, feeling the weight of the wooden holder in your hand. The slight taper that fits your grip. The nib is a fine steel point, a little worn from use, but still sharp enough to make a clean line. You dip it into the ink bottle, lowering the point until it touches the surface of the liquid. There is a tiny click as the metal touches the glass rim, and you draw it out carefully, wiping the excess ink against the inside of the bottle's neck in a slow, deliberate motion. You watch the ink bead on the tip, a dark, glossy drop that catches the candlelight. Then you bring the pen to the paper, pausing just before the nib touches. The moment stretches out, unhurried, a small pause full of expectation. You are in no rush. The night is long, and there is nothing else you need to do. The first word you write is the name of the person you are writing to, a simple name that you have written many times before. The letters flow from the pen with a soft scratching sound, a sound that is both dry and liquid, the sound of ink being laid onto paper. The line is thin and dark, and you watch it form the curve of a letter, the straight downstroke, the cross of a T. You lift the pen and dip it again, and the process repeats, slow and steady. The ink dries quickly, changing from a wet shine to a matte black that sits on the surface of the paper. You can smell the ink now, a faint, sharp odor like crushed nuts or old wood, a smell that is both clean and ancient. It mixes with the candle's tallow scent and the dry canvas and the straw, creating a single layered smell that you know well. It is the smell of quiet evenings, of solitude, of the small ritual of writing a letter home. You pause after a few words, letting the pen rest in your hand. Your eyes lift from the paper and look at the candle again. The flame has not changed. It burns as steadily as before, but the wax has begun to melt around the wick, forming a small pool of clear liquid. The pool reflects the flame upside down, a tiny golden image that shimmers when you breathe. The wax at the edge of the pool cools and turns opaque, building a small white rim that will slowly grow taller as the candle burns lower. You watch a single drop of hot wax slide down the side of the candle stub, slow and thick, like honey dripping from a spoon. It cools as it moves, leaving a trail that hardens into a soft, waxy ridge. There is no hurry in the wax. It moves at its own pace, and you watch it with a kind of quiet patience that matches the night itself. Outside, the last human sounds have finally died away. You can hear, very faintly, the sound of a distant stream, a low, continuous rush that you only notice when you hold your breath. It is a sound that has been there all along, hidden under the louder noises of the day, and now it emerges like a thought that has been waiting. The canvas of the tent makes a soft popping sound as the night air cools and the fabric tightens, a single small noise that is gone as soon as it comes. A moth flutters against the outside of the canvas, a soft, padded tapping, and then it flies away into the darkness. You think about the world outside the tent, the long rows of sleeping men, the horses standing with their heads down, the sentries walking their slow posts, the stars beginning to show in the clear sky. But you do not go out to look. You are settled, now, your body heavy and still on the crate, your mind slowing down like a wheel, coasting to a stop. You dip the pen again and write a few more lines. You do not write about great things. You write that you are well, that the weather has been dry, that the food is plain but enough. You describe the tent, the candle, the quiet of the evening. You ask small questions, how the garden is growing, whether the old dog still sleeps under the porch, if the well pump needs priming. These are not urgent questions. They are just the small threads that tie you to a place far away, a place where the same moon is shining, where people are doing ordinary things in the ordinary light of their own candles and lamps. The letter is not long, not yet, and it will not be long even when you finish. It is just a brief message, a small proof that you are here and you are thinking of them. You pause again, listening. A new sound has entered the night, a very distant sound, so faint that you might be imagining it. It is the sound of a fiddle, maybe, or a mouth organ, something being played softly and far away. The notes are slow and sad, but not in a way that hurts. They are sad like the sound of rain on a roof, a feeling that is somehow both lonely and comforting. You stop writing and simply listen. The music drifts, stops, starts again, as if the player is tired and only playing a few notes at a time before resting. It weaves itself into the cricket's song, into the hush of the stream, into the slow rhythm of your own breath. You feel your eyelids grow a little heavier, but you are not sleepy yet, only deeply calm, as if you are floating in warm water. The candle flame draws your eyes back. It has burned down a small amount, and the pool of wax is wider now. You notice that the flame has begun to move a little, swaying gently from side to side in a rhythm that has no cause you can feel. The air inside the tent is still, but perhaps the heat of the flame creates its own small currents, tiny eddies that make the light dance. The shadows on the canvas walls sway with it, a slow, hypnotic movement that makes the whole tent seem to be breathing. You let your gaze soften, watching the light without focusing, and the flame becomes a blur of gold that fills your vision. Time seems to stretch out, each second a little longer than the last, and you are not aware of how long you sit there, just breathing, just watching. After a while, you become aware of the pen still in your hand. The ink on the nib has dried, and you dip it again, the familiar click and scrape, a small punctuation in the silence. You write a little more, telling them about the sunset, how the sky turned a deep orange and then a soft purple before fading to grey. You write about the taste of the coffee this morning, bitter and smoky, and how it warmed you from the inside. You write about the feel of the wool blanket on your shoulders, the way its rough fibers catch on your jacket. You write slowly, letting each sentence form itself fully before you commit it to paper, and you cross nothing out because there is no need. This letter is not a draft, it is the final version, simple, untrue. The night deepens. You sense the change in the air, a slight drop in temperature that makes you pull your jacket a little closer. The cold is not sharp, just a gentle reminder that the world outside is vast and dark. But here, in the small tent, you are sheltered. The candle continues to burn, a steady companion, its light a warm barrier against the dark. You think about how many other candles might be burning at this moment, in other tents, in houses far away, in windows by the sea. The thought does not make you feel lonely. It makes you feel connected, part of a great, quiet network of small lights spread out across the land. You set the pen down for a moment and stretch your fingers, which have cramped slightly from the grip. You flex them, watching the candlelight trace the lines of your knuckles, the small calluses on your thumb and forefinger. Your hands are a working person's hands, used to tools and ropes and the weight of a musket, but now they are doing this careful, delicate work of forming letters. It is a different kind of labor, a quiet one, and it brings a different kind of satisfaction. You pick up the pen again, and the nib touches the paper with a new word, a word that is simply the beginning of a thought about the next day, which will be much like this day, full of small routines and small moments. You let your mind wander as you write, not in a way that distracts you, but in a way that allows memories to surface gently. You remember a morning in a kitchen, the smell of bread baking, the sound of a spoon stirring in a pot. You remember a path through a field, the way the tall grass brushed against your legs. These memories come and go without demand, like clouds crossing the moon, and you do not hold on to them. You just let them pass, and you let your pen continue its steady movement across the page. The letter is almost done now. You can feel the end approaching, like the last few steps of the familiar walk. You write the final line, a simple wish for good health and a promise to write again when you can. You sign your name, the letters flowing from the pen with the same care as the first word. Then you set the pen down and read over what you have written. Though you do not really read, you just look at the shapes of the words, the way the ink sits on the paper, the small variations in the thickness of the lines. It is enough. You fold the paper carefully, creasing it with your thumbnail to make a sharp edge, and then you set it aside on the crate, where it will wait until morning. The candle still burns, but it is shorter now, the flame a little lower. You do not blow it out yet. You just sit in the quiet, letting the night hold you. The sounds of the camp are now only a memory of sounds, replaced by the deep, breathing silence of sleeping men and resting animals. The cricket song continues, a steady thread that ties the darkness together. You feel a great peace settling over you, a peace that is as soft and as heavy as a wool blanket. There is no need to do anything else, to go anywhere, to be anyone but who you are in this moment, a person in a tent, by a candle, at the end of an ordinary day. And as you sit there, the night wraps around you completely, and you are still, and everything is just as it should be. The candle is the center of everything now. It stands on the tin plate, a simple stub of tallow not much taller than your thumb, with a wick that has curled slightly at the tip. The flame burns straight up, unwavering, a small golden tongue that seems almost solid in the still air. You sit on the wooden crate, the board across your knees, the letter half written and set aside, and you give your whole attention to this small light. It is the only light in the tent, and it makes the space feel like a room inside a house, a room with walls of warm, glowing canvas. The darkness beyond the candle's reach is soft and deep, but it does not feel threatening. It feels like a curtain drawn around a bed, keeping the world away. You settle your weight more comfortably, letting your shoulders drop, and you watch. The flame has a shape that is both simple and complex. At its core, right where the wick meets the wax pool, there is a tiny blue heart, a small cone of pale gas that is almost invisible unless you look carefully. The blue is the color of a clear winter sky just after sunset, faint and cool, and it hovers there, feeding the yellow brilliance above. The yellow part of the flame rises up, tapering to a point that flickers and shifts every so slightly, though the air is so calm that the movement is more like a gentle breathing than a dance. You can see layers within the yellow, from a deeper amber near the base to a paler lemon at the edges, where the light seems to dissolve into the air. Sometimes a tiny particle of soot escapes and burns away in a quick spark, a miniature shooting star that lasts only a fraction of a second. You watch the flame and feel your breathing slow to match its stillness. The candle makes no sound at all, except for a very faint, steady hiss that you only notice when you lean close, a sound like a whisper, so soft it might be the blood moving in your own ears. The silence around you is vast, broken only by the cricket chorus outside, which has become so constant that it fades from your attention like wallpaper. Inside this tent, there is only the candle, and you, and the quiet between you is comfortable, like the silence between old friends. The light touches your face with a faint warmth, and if you lift your hand, you can feel the heat on your palm, a gentle, radiating presence. The warmth is not enough to heat the tent, but it is enough to remind you that fire is alive, consuming something invisible, turning tallow into glow. The tallow itself is a soft, whitish substance made from rendered animal fat, and it has a faintly greasy feel if you touch it. The stub of the candle is uneven, slightly wider at the base where it has melted and rehardened in previous nights, creating a small skirt of solidified drips. The surface of the candle near the flame is glossy and wet, a pool of clear liquid wax that reflects the flame like a tiny golden mirror. The pool is about the size of a coin, and its edges are a thin rim of opaque white wax, built up slowly as the liquid cools at the perimeter. You watch this rim very closely, noticing how it rises imperceptibly as the candle burns, a silent process of transformation from solid to liquid, liquid to vapor, vapor to light. The wax at the pool's edge is not quite solid. It is soft like butter on a warm day, and you could reshape it with a fingertip if you wanted, though you do not. A single drop of hot wax gathers at the side of the candle, near the rim, growing slowly as the pool overflows. It hangs there, a heavy, quivering bead of clear liquid that catches the light and glows like a tiny sun. You watch it, and it seems to take a long time to decide to fall. Finally, it releases and slides down the side of the candle stub with a slow, viscous motion, leaving a wet trail that cools and hardens almost immediately into a whitish ridge. The drop reaches the tin plate and spreads slightly, cooling into a flat, smooth disc. You follow its entire journey, and when it stops, you feel a small sense of completion, as if you have witnessed something important. Another drop will form later, and another, and by the time the candle is finished, there will be a small landscape of wax drippings on the tin, a miniature mountain range of solidified tallow. There is no hurry in this process. The wax moves at its own pace, patient and deliberate, and you are content to watch it for as long as it takes. The light from the candle paints the tent walls in colors that shift as you watch. The canvas is a light tan color in daylight, but under the candle's glow it becomes a deep, warm amber, like honey or aged parchment. The texture of the fabric, a coarse weave of cotton threads, shows up in the angled light as a subtle grid of tiny shadows and highlights. Where the canvas slopes up to the ridgepole, the light fades gradually into shadow, creating a soft gradient from gold to brown to deep, velvety black. You can see the seams of the tent, the lines of stitching that hold the panels together, and the light traces each stitch with a faint highlight. Near the top, a small patch of canvas is thinner than the rest, worn from many rainstorms and wind, and the light shines through it a little, creating a soft, diffused spot of brightness that looks like a star seen through a cloud. Your own shadow falls on the canvas behind you, a huge, soft-edged shape that moves only when you move. When you lean a little to the left, the shadow shifts, growing larger and then smaller, and the candle flame flickers for just a moment, disturbed by the air you have moved. The flame rights itself quickly, returning to its steady burn, and you hold still again, letting the shadows settle. The tin plate itself casts a small, sharp shadow on the crate, a dark circle with a bright rim where the light catches the edge of the metal. You notice how the light picks out the grain of the wood on the crate, the small splinters and the darker knots, each detail thrown into gentle relief. Nothing is perfectly smooth in this light. Everything has a texture, a history, a small story told by the shadows. You watch the flame and begin to notice its tiny variations. Though the air is mostly still, there are invisible currents that move through the tent, perhaps from your own breath, perhaps from the slight draft under the canvas walls. The flame responds to these currents with a gentle sway, leaning first one way, then the other, its tip bending like a blade of grass in a light breeze. Sometimes it stretches tall and thin, and the light becomes a little brighter. Then it sinks back into a rounder, softer shape, and the light dims just perceptibly. These changes are slow and subtle, and you would not notice them if you were not paying such close attention. The color of the flame changes with its shape, the blue heart growing larger when the flame is short and wide, the yellow becoming more intense when it stretches up. It is like watching a living thing breathe, a creature made of heat and light that is content to simply exist in this small space with you. The smell of the burning tallow continues to fill the tent, a warm, slightly savory scent that you have come to associate with quiet evenings. It is not a clean smell like beeswax would be. It is earthier, closer to the smell of a kitchen where meat has been cooked, a faint reminder of the animal fat from which the candle was made. Mixed with it is the faint metallic tang of the ink, which has dried on the nib of your pen, and the dry, dusty scent of the canvas, and the clean, slightly sweet odor of the straw in your bedroll. All these smells layer together into a single, comforting atmosphere, a smell that says home. Even though home is far away, you breathe it in slowly, letting it fill your lungs, and each exhale is a little longer than the inhale, a little deeper. Time moves differently in this light. You have no watch, and even if you did, you would not look at it. The passing of time is marked only by the slow sinking of the wax pool and the gradual shortening of the candle stub. At first, the flame was high above the rim of the tin plate, but now you notice it has descended just a little, the distance between flame and plate growing smaller. You try to remember when you lit the candle, but the memory is already soft and indistinct, like something that happened a long time ago. It might have been 10 minutes, or it might have been an hour. There is no way to tell, and it does not matter. The night is long, and you have no place to be except here, no task to complete except this slow, careful act of watching. The candle burns at its own rate, consuming the tallow with a steady appetite, and you match your pace to its. You become aware of the weight of your own body on the crate, the points of contact between you and the wood, the way your thighs press against the board, your feet flat on the ground. The candle's warmth reaches your face and hands, but not your feet, which are cool inside your boots. You consider pulling the wool blanket over them, but you do not move. The stillness is too complete, too pleasant to disturb. You feel your pulse in your temples, a slow, steady throb that seems to keep time with the gentle sway of the flame, though that is only your imagination. Your eyelids feel heavy, but you are not sleepy, only deeply relaxed, as if you are suspended in warm water. Every small sound from outside, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of a horse in the picket line, comes to you as if from a great distance, muffled and softened by the tent walls. The candlelight has a way of making you think about other lights you have known. Without effort, you remember the oil lamp that hung in your kitchen at home, its glass chimney sooty at the top, its brass base polished bright. That lamp had a different kind of flame, a broader, yellower glow that smelled of kerosene and made a soft, puffing sound when the wick needed trimming. You remember the fireplace in that same kitchen, the way the flames curled around a log of hickory, sending out sparks and a sharp, sweet smoke. You remember candles on a birthday cake, so many years ago, the way they flickered and danced with every breath of laughter. These memories come and go like the shadows on the canvas, not pulling you away from the present, but simply floating through your mind like leaves on a slow creek. You let them pass, and you return to the candle in front of you, the only light that matters now. You shift your position slightly, just a small adjustment to ease a stiffness in your back, and the flame responds with a quick flicker. The liquid wax pool sloshes a little, a tiny wave that almost reaches the edge but then settles back. You watch the wave subside, the surface of the wax returning to its smooth mirror-like stillness, and the flame straightens again. The interruption is over in a second, and the quiet returns, deeper than before. You feel a small satisfaction in having seen the wax move, a reminder that even the most solid-looking things are fluid under the right conditions. The candle continues to burn, untroubled by the disturbance, its wick drawing up the liquid tallow with a steady, capillary pull, feeding the flame with a constancy that you find deeply reassuring. The blue heart of the flame draws your gaze again. It is so small, so delicate, a tiny dome of cool fire that exists only because the tallow vapor is mixing with the air in just the right proportion. You can see the boundary between the blue and the yellow, a sharp line where the chemistry of the flame changes. Inside the blue zone, the wax molecules are breaking apart, stripping themselves down to carbon and hydrogen. Then the carbon atoms meet the oxygen in the air and burst into the bright yellow that you see. It is a quiet, invisible violence, a constant rearrangement of matter that gives off nothing but warmth and light. You do not think about this in scientific terms, but you sense it, the way one senses the processes of a living thing, the slow, steady metabolism of the candle. It is eating the tallow and drinking the air, and in return, it gives you this small sun, this companionable glow. You lean forward very slowly, bringing your face closer to the flame, and you feel the heat increase on your cheeks and nose. The warmth is soft but distinct, a gentle pressure of infrared light that makes your skin tingle a little. You can see the finest details now, the individual fibers of the wick glowing red at the tip, The shimmer of the liquid wax surface, the tiny convection currents that rise from the flame and make the air above it tremble. If you hold your hands just above the flame, the heat is strong enough to be uncomfortable, so you keep your distance, content to observe without touching. You watch the wick grow a little longer as the wax pool sinks, the blackened tip curling over, and you know that soon you will need to trim it, or the flame will begin to smoke. But not yet. For now, the burn is clean and even, and the light is perfect. The idea of trimming the wick brings to mind the small scissors you keep in your sewing kit, a tiny pair of folding shears that you use to cut thread and trim your own hair. Trimming a candle wick is a small, meditative task. You snuff the flame, wait for the wick to cool, then cut it to about 1/4 inch, removing the charred, curled tip that would otherwise produce a sooty, uneven burn. You are not ready to do this yet. The candle has many minutes, perhaps an hour, of good light left. But you know the moment will come, and you will perform the task with the same slow care you have given to everything this evening. The thought does not hurry you. It simply sits in your mind, a small marker of something that will happen later. Outside, the night has deepened fully. The temperature has dropped a few more degrees, and you can feel the cool air seeping under the canvas edges, a faint draft that moves across your ankles. The candle flame, sensitive to the smallest air movements, leans slightly away from the direction of the draft, as if pointing you toward the source. You watch it lean and then recover, a slow, graceful nod that repeats every few seconds as the outside air shifts. The draft is not strong enough to blow the flame out, just strong enough to make it dance a little, adding a new layer of movement to your vigil. You follow the dance with your eyes, letting the gentle swaying become a kind of lullaby for your vision, a slow, rhythmic motion that soothes without demanding. Your mind drifts to the letter you wrote earlier, now lying folded on the crate. The ink is completely dry, the words settled into the paper, permanent. In the morning, you will seal the letter with a dab of wax, perhaps a drip from this very candle, and you will hand it to the company clerk, who will see that it travels on a wagon, then a train, then another wagon, until it reaches the hands of the person whose name you wrote at the top. You imagine that person opening the letter by their own candlelight, perhaps in a kitchen much like the one you remember, and reading your words in the same quiet, patient way you wrote them. The thought connects you to them, the two of you linked by this small flame, by this act of writing and reading, separated by distance but joined by light. You settle deeper into your stillness, and the candle burns on. The pool of wax is wider now, the rim higher, and the flame has sunk noticeably lower. A second drop of wax slides down the side, this one on the opposite side from the first, following a different path, creating a second ridge. The tin plate is gaining a thin layer of drips, a small record of the time you have spent here. You watch the second drop complete its journey, and then return your gaze to the flame itself, which has not changed its essential nature at all. It is the same flame it was when you lit it, the same combination of blue and yellow, the same steady presence. It will continue to be the same flame until the tallow is gone and the wick has nothing left to draw, and then it will go out in its own time, and the darkness will come. But that is still far off, a distant event that does not concern you now. For now there is only the light, only the quiet, only the slow, patient burning that turns tallow into time. You feel your breathing become even slower, your eyelids heavier, though still you do not sleep. You are in a state between waking and dreaming, where thoughts become images and images fade into sensations. The candle flame becomes a small golden sun in a miniature universe, and you are a quiet planet orbiting it at a respectful distance. The sounds of the camp have become a single, low hum, the breath of hundreds of sleeping men, the distant rustle of the trees at the edge of the clearing. You let your chin drop slightly, then lift it again, and the candle flame blurs and sharpens as your focus drifts. The night holds you in its palm, and the candle keeps its vigil, and everything is still, and everything is calm, and the steady light continues to shine, asking nothing, offering only itself. The sounds of the camp at night are not a single thing, but a slow gathering of small, separate noises that drift into the tent and settle around you like a familiar presence. You sit on the wooden crate, with the letter half finished on the board across your knees, and the candle burns with its steady glow, but your attention has turned outward, past the canvas walls, into the wide, dark space where the rest of the army sleeps. The tent fabric is thin. It does not block sound so much as soften it, turning sharp noises into muffled, distant versions of themselves. Everything that reaches you has been filtered through the heavy night air and the cotton weave, arriving as a gentle reminder that you are not alone, that the world outside is resting too. The first sound you notice, because it is always there, is the chorus of crickets in the grass. They pulse with a steady rhythm, a long continuous trill that rises and falls in waves, as if the insects are breathing together. The sound is so constant that it becomes a kind of silence itself, a background hum that your ears accept and then forget. It is a dry sound, a rubbing of tiny legs against tiny wings, multiplied 1,000 times until it fills the whole valley. Sometimes the pitch seems to shift slightly, a note bending up or down as a cloud passes over the moon or the temperature drops a degree, but the change is so subtle that you cannot be sure you heard it. The crickets are the foundation upon which all the other sounds are built, the canvas upon which the night paints its quiet picture. You let your eyes close, not because you are sleepy, but because you want to listen more carefully, and the darkness behind your eyelids helps you focus. The cricket song remains unchanged, and now you begin to pick out other threads woven into it. Far to the left, out toward where the horses are picketed, a heavy hoof stamps on the packed earth. It is a single dull thud that vibrates through the ground more than through the air, a sound you feel in the soles of your boots as much as you hear it. After the stamp, the horse blows out a long, fluttering breath through its nostrils, a sound that starts deep and ends in a soft, rattling sigh. The animal shifts its weight, and you hear the creak of the leather halter, the jingle of a bridle ring, small metallic notes that hang in the air for a moment before the silence swallows them. The horse is not restless, just settling, finding a more comfortable position on its feet, and after a few seconds it is still again. The quiet returns, but it is a different quiet now, a quiet that holds the memory of the hoof-fall and the breath, like a pond that shows a fading ripple. Not long after the horse settles, a canvas flap nearby makes a soft rubbing sound as a slight breeze moves through the camp. The breeze is not strong enough to shake the tent. It is only a gentle push of cooler air sliding down from the ridge. The tent flaps respond with a low rustle, like the sweep of a broom across a wooden floor, a dry brushing noise that comes and goes in a single, lazy wave. You can hear the same sound repeated across the camp, a soft, staggered chorus of canvas stirring and then going still, one tent after another, as the breeze touches each one in turn. Your own tent walls give a faint shiver, the fabric tightening and relaxing, and the candle flame bends a little to the left before straightening again. The breeze passes on, and the flaps fall silent, leaving behind only the crickets and the slow, deep breathing of the night. Somewhere to the right, a man coughs twice. The sound is muffled, as if he has turned his face into his blanket, and it is a dry, rasping cough that suggests dust or a slight cold rather than anything serious. There is a pause, then the rustle of straw as he shifts on his bedroll, and then silence. The cough does not wake anyone. It is simply a small punctuation in the long sentence of the night, a brief reminder that other people are lying in their own tents, wrapped in their own blankets, listening to the same sounds you hear. A moment later, a voice calls out from another direction, a low, sleepy murmur that might be a good night to a tent mate or a mumbled response to a dream. The words are impossible to make out, blurred by canvas and distance into a gentle, shapeless sound, like a stone dropped into deep water. The voice fades, and a tent flap drops with a faint, final thump, as if someone has just come in from a last walk and is sealing themselves away for the night. The thump is a soft, padded sound, canvas against canvas, and it seems to signal an end to something, a closing of accounts. You open your eyes slowly and look at the candle. It has not changed. It still burns with the same steady glow, the pool of wax a little wider, the rim a little higher. The sounds have not disturbed it, but they have added a new dimension to the tent, a sense of depth and space that goes beyond the canvas walls. You are aware now of the rows of tents stretching away in every direction, each one a small bubble of warmth and darkness, each one holding a person who is also listening, or sleeping, or writing their own letter. The camp is not a collection of separate shelters. It is a single, living thing, breathing with the combined breath of all its inhabitants, rustling with their small movements, humming with their shared presence. And the sounds are its voice, a low, wordless voice that speaks of rest and safety and the slow passing of the hours. Another sound drifts in, so faint that at first you think you imagined it. It is the rhythmic scrape of a shovel, a steady, metallic grinding that comes from somewhere near the latrine trenches. The sound is regular, unhurried, a scrape, a pause, a soft thump as a shovelful of earth is turned, then a scrape again. It is probably the night soil detail, men working in the dark to fill in old trenches and dig new ones, a necessary chore that goes on even while the camp sleeps. The scrape repeats over and over, a slow mechanical rhythm that becomes almost hypnotic. You find yourself breathing in time with it, a slow inhale on the scrape, a slow exhale on the thump. The sound is not unpleasant. It is the sound of order being maintained, of the camp caring for itself even in the quiet hours. After a while the scraping stops, and a voice gives a low command, too far to understand, and then there is only the crickets again, and the faint jingle of the shovel being set aside. You stretch your legs out under the crate and cross your ankles, settling deeper into your seat. The board on your knees shifts a little, and you steady it with one hand. The letter waits, its words half-formed, but you are not ready to write again yet. The sounds hold you in a state of attentive calm, a place between action and rest. You listen for the next noise the way you might watch for the next cloud to pass, with a gentle, unfocused expectation. And the night does not disappoint. From the tree line far beyond the last row of tents, an owl calls. The sound is a soft, rounded hoot, a single note that seems to ask a question and then wait for an answer. The note hangs in the air for a long moment, pure and clear, before fading into the cricket hum. You wait too, your breath held, and after a pause so long you think the owl has given up. An answering hoot comes from even farther away, so faint it might be an echo. The second call is lower in pitch, a sleepy, distant reply that seems to travel through the trees rather than over them. The two owls trade a few more calls, their voices spaced out like buoys in a dark ocean, and then they fall silent, their conversation complete. The quiet that follows is deep and satisfying, like the silence after a piece of music ends. A new sound begins, so gradual that you do not notice it at first. It is the wind moving through the tops of the trees of the edge of the camp, a sound that is less a rustle and more a long, sustained sigh. The leaves, which are dry and beginning to curl with the coming season, brush against each other in a soft, papery susurration. The sound rises and falls with the gusts, a slow, oceanic breathing that comes from high above the ground. The trees are far enough away that their sound is muted, a gentle white noise that fills the upper register of the night. When the wind drops, the trees go still, and you hear, very clearly, a single leaf detach and fall, a tiny, brittle scattering as it tumbles through the branches to the ground. Then the wind picks up again, and the sigh returns, and the leaf is forgotten. Inside the tent, you become aware of a sound that is so close it is almost inside you, the sound of your own breathing. You hear the soft intake of air through your nose, the slight catch in the back of your throat, the longer, slower exhale that leaves your lips in a quiet stream. Your chest rises and falls under the wool blanket, and the fabric makes a faint, brushing sound against your jacket. The wooden crate creaks almost imperceptibly as you shift your weight, a tiny, dry sound like the crack of a twig under snow. Even the candle has a sound, you realize, a sound so small it is hardly a sound at all, the steady, sibilant hiss of the flame consuming the tallow, a whisper at the edge of hearing. All these near sounds, the sounds of your own body and your own small space, weave together with the far sounds outside to create a single, continuous tapestry of quiet noise. You hear a distant cough again, from a different direction this time, a short, sharp bark that is quickly stifled. Then a murmur of voices, two men talking in low tones somewhere in the tent rows. Their words a soft, indistinguishable rumble. You cannot tell what they are saying, but the cadence is calm, unhurried, the kind of conversation you have when you cannot sleep and find a companion who also cannot sleep. The voices go back and forth like a slow game of catch, and then one of them laughs, a quiet, breathy chuckle that is cut off quickly, as if the laugher remembered the hour. The laugh is not loud, but it is warm, and it carries a sense of shared humor that makes the night feel less empty. After the laugh, the voices drop even lower, and then they stop altogether, and you imagine the two men settling back into their blankets, their conversation done, their minds a little quieter for the exchange. A dog barks somewhere beyond the picket line, a single, sharp yap that is answered by another dog farther away. The barks are not aggressive. They are the kind of barks dogs give when they hear something in the woods that they cannot identify, a fox or a raccoon or just a branch falling. The second dog's bark is higher pitched, a quick, anxious yelp, and then a man's voice, harsh but not angry, calls out for the dog to hush. There is a moment of scuffling, the sound of a chain being pulled tight, and then the dogs are quiet. The quiet feels larger after the barks, as if the night has drawn back and then settled more deeply. You listen to the silence that follows, and realize it is not truly silent. It is filled with the cricket pulse and the tree sigh and the far-off stream. All the sounds that are too constant to notice until something louder makes them visible again. Your attention drifts to the rhythmic nature of the shovel scraping, which has started again, a little closer this time. It is a different shovel or a different digger because the pace is slightly faster, the scrape a little shorter, the pause between strokes a little briefer. You hear the sound of dirt being tamped down, a series of soft, flat thuds, and then the shovel scraping resumes. The night soil detail is making its slow circuit, working its way through the camp with their buckets and spades, invisible in the dark. The sound follows them as they move, a traveling island of quiet industry that passes from left to right, growing slightly louder, then fading again as they move on to the next trench. The scrape becomes fainter and fainter until it is just a memory, and then it is gone, and the night folds back over the place where it was. The tent next to yours makes a sound, a soft rustling thump, as the man inside rolls over in his sleep. You hear the straw in his mattress crunch under his weight, a dry, crackling sound like paper being crumpled slowly. He mumbles something, a single syllable that might be a name or just a noise, and then he sighs, a long, contented exhale that ends in a soft snore. The snore is not loud. It is a gentle, rhythmic purr that catches on the edge of each breath, a sound that is somehow reassuring. It tells you that someone near you is deeply asleep, untroubled, safe. The snore continues for a few minutes, a steady counterpoint to the crickets, and then it stops abruptly as the man shifts position again, and the silence returns. You become aware of a new sound, one that is so faint you have to hold your breath to hear it. It is the sound of the stream, the same stream you noticed earlier, its voice a low, continuous rush that comes from the direction of the tree line. The water moves over stones and around bends, a liquid gurgling murmur that never changes and never stops. It is the sound of permanence, of something that was flowing long before the camp was pitched and will flow long after it is gone. The stream does not care about the war or the letters or the candles. It simply runs, carrying the night with it, a steady, ancient song. You let your breathing sink with its rhythm, the endless, patient movement of water over rock, and for a moment you feel as if you are floating in that current, weightless and still. A new breeze stirs the tent flaps, stronger this time, and the canvas gives a deeper, fuller rustle, a sound like a sheet being shaken out. The candle flame wavers, ducking low and then springing back up, and the shadows jump on the walls. The breeze brings with it the smell of wood smoke from the dying cook fires, a sharp, sweet scent that cuts through the tallow and the ink. You hear a tent peg creak somewhere, a thin, metallic groan as the rope tightens in the wind, and then the gust dies away, and the canvas relaxes with a soft, sighing whisper. The candle steadies itself, and the shadows settle, and the smell of smoke fades slowly, leaving behind only the familiar, musty odor of the tent. You look at your hands resting on the board, the pen lying beside them. The sounds have woven themselves into the silence like threads into cloth, each one a different color and texture. You pick up the pen and dip it in the ink, the familiar click and scrape, a new sound that joins the others. You write a few words on the paper, describing the quiet of the night, the horse's breath, the distant scraping shovel. As you write, you continue to listen, and the sounds become part of the letter, part of the ink, part of the story you are telling to someone far away. The cricket song pulses beneath your words, and the owl's distant hoot punctuates a sentence, and the snore from the next tent provides a gentle, rhythmic undertone. You are not just writing about the night, you are writing the night itself, translating its low, wordless voice into letters and words and quiet, careful phrases. The sounds go on, and you go on listening, and the boundary between inside and outside, between self and world, grows soft and indistinct. The camp breathes, and you breathe with it. The crickets pulse, and your heart pulses with them. The stream flows, and your thoughts flow. Everything is connected by the thin, silver threads of sound that crisscross the darkness, a web of quiet noise that holds the night together. And you sit at the center of it, a single, still point, wrapped in wool and canvas and candlelight, listening to the camp as it sleeps, as it dreams, as it waits for the slow arrival of dawn. The pen rests in your hand, and you take a moment to feel its weight. It is not heavy, just substantial enough to remind you that you are holding something solid, something made with purpose. The wooden holder is a straight shaft, about the length of your hand from wrist to fingertip, turned smooth on a lathe, and then worn even smoother by months of use. The wood is a light-colored beech or maple, its grain a series of fine, parallel lines that run the length of the holder, now darkened a little where your fingers have held it most often. You roll the pen between your thumb and forefinger, feeling the subtle variations in its surface, the way the varnish has worn away in patches, leaving areas of raw wood that feel slightly softer and warmer than the glossy parts. The holder tapers slightly toward the nib end, where a metal ferrule crimps the wood and grips the steel nib in a tight, secure embrace. The ferrule is brass, and it has a dull, golden patina that catches the candlelight in a muted gleam. You run your thumb over the join where the wood meets the metal, and the transition is smooth, almost seamless, a small piece of careful craftsmanship that you appreciate in this quiet moment. The nib itself is a thing of delicate engineering. It is a fine steel point, about an inch long, with a split down the middle that carries the ink from the base to the paper. The two tines of the nib are curved slightly upward at the tip, creating a tiny reservoir that holds just enough ink to write several words before needing a fresh dip. You examine the nib in the candlelight, turning it slowly, and the light catches the edge of the slit, a hairline of brightness that runs from the base to the very tip. The tip is worn but still sharp. It has written many letters before this one, and it has conformed itself to the angle of your hand, the pressure of your grip. The steel has a bluish-grey color, darker than the brass ferrule, and it is spotted with a faint oxidation around the base, where ink has dried and been cleaned away many times. You know that if you press too hard, the tines will spread and the ink will blob, and if you press too lightly, the line will be faint and scratchy. But you have learned the right pressure through long practice, a balance that is now instinctive, as natural as breathing. You dip the nib into the ink bottle, and your ears catch the tiny, distinct sound of metal touching glass. It is a light, clear click, a note that rings for a fraction of a second and then fades. The sound is different depending on how you dip. If you go straight down, the click is sharper. If you come in at an angle, it is softer, more of a tap. You have done this so many times that you no longer think about the motion, but tonight, in the stillness, you notice the sound, as if for the first time. You feel the slight resistance of the ink as the nib enters the liquid, a faint viscous drag that tells you the ink is the right consistency, not too thick, not too thin. When you withdraw the pen, you wipe the nib against the inner rim of the bottle, a slow, careful motion that removes the excess ink and prevents drips. The rim makes a soft scraping sound, metal on glass, and you see the streak of ink it leaves behind. A dark smear that will dry and build up over time, layer upon layer, until the bottle is empty and you start a new one. The ink that remains on the nib forms a glossy, convex bead right at the tip, a perfect dome of black liquid that trembles slightly with the movement of your hand. You bring the pen to the paper, and just before the nib touches, you pause. There is a small, expectant silence, a moment of hovering potential. Then you lower your hand, and the nib makes contact. The first stroke is a soft, brushing sound, a sound that is somewhere between a whisper and a scratch. It is the sound of a sharp metal point moving across a fibrous surface, the tines spreading just enough to release a controlled flow of ink. The sound changes depending on the direction of the stroke. A downstroke, which goes with the grain of the paper, is smoother and quieter. An upstroke or a crossstroke, which goes against the grain, produces a slightly rougher, more textured noise. You listen to these subtle variations as you write, and they form a tiny private music that accompanies the words. The sound is never harsh, it is always gentle, a soft, rhythmic scritch that blends with the cricket's song and the candle's hiss, a sound so quiet that it would be inaudible if the tent were not so still. The paper itself is a tactile landscape. You feel its texture through the nib, the tiny ridges and valleys of the cotton fibers transmitting up through the metal and wood to your fingers. The paper is hand-laid, and it has a slight tooth, a fine sandy roughness that grips the nib in a pleasant way. It is not as smooth as modern paper. It has a character, a personality. When you run a dry finger across its surface, you feel a faint velvety drag, and you can see the individual fibers if you hold it up to the light, a random, tangled web of cream-colored threads. The paper is absorbent, but not too absorbent. The ink sits on the surface for a brief moment, a wet, glossy line that reflects the candlelight, and then it sinks in, drying to a flat, matte finish. You watch this transformation as you write each word. The ink goes down as a liquid, dark and shiny, and then, over the course of a few seconds, it loses its gloss and becomes one with the paper, a permanent mark that will not smudge or fade. The smell of the paper is a faint, clean odor, like dry leaves or old books, a smell that speaks of cotton rags and a paper mill somewhere far away, where vats of pulp are stirred and sheets are pressed and hung to dry in long, airy lofts. Your hand moves across the page in a slow, steady rhythm. You form each letter with care, not because the recipient will judge your handwriting, but because the act itself is satisfying. The downstrokes are thick, where the tines spread and lay down more ink, and the upstrokes are thin, where the tines come together and only a trace of ink passes. This variation in line weight is the signature of the steel nib, and you take a quiet pleasure in seeing the contrast on the page. The letters flow from your pen in a script that is uniquely yours, with small idiosyncrasies, the way you loop your L's, the slight backward slant of your D's, the small flourish you add to the tail of a Y. These habits are so ingrained that you do not think about them. Your hand simply knows the shapes, and it produces them with a mechanical, unhurried precision. You watch the words emerge, line after line, and they seem to come from a place deeper than conscious thought, a place of muscle memory and long practice. You pause to dip the pen again. The ink level in the bottle has dropped only a small amount, but you can see the difference when you tilt the glass. The surface of the ink is a dark, reflective pool, like a miniature lake at night, and it shimmers as you bring the pen down. You submerge the nib just past the breather hole, the small round opening at the base of the slit, and you hold it there for a second, letting the capillary action draw the ink up between the tines. When you lift the pen, you watch the excess drip back into the bottle. 1, 2, 3 drops, each one making a tiny liquid sound, a soft plip that is barely audible. You wipe the nib again, and this time you notice the way the ink stains your fingers, a faint dark smudge on your thumb and forefinger that has been there for days, a semi-permanent mark of your trade. You do not mind the stain. It is part of the process, part of the ritual, a small reminder that you are a person who writes. The board across your knees is another part of this tactile experience. It is a plain piece of pine, about the size of a large book with rounded corners and a surface that has been smoothed by use. You can feel the grain of the wood through the paper, a faint rippled texture that gives a little resistance to the nib. The board is not perfectly flat. It has a slight warp from humidity, a gentle curve that you have learned to accommodate by tilting your hand slightly. The edge of the board presses against your thighs, and you feel the pressure through your wool trousers, a steady, grounding sensation. The board has a few ink stains of its own, dark spots where the pen has rested or dripped in the past, and these stains form a random pattern that you have memorized without meaning to. The board is warm from your body heat, and it smells of pine resin and old ink and the faint, clean scent of the blanket that you sometimes use to cushion it. As you write, your free hand rests on the edge of the board, holding the paper steady. The paper shifts slightly with each pen stroke, a tiny, minute movement that you correct without thinking. Your non-writing fingers are relaxed, curled loosely, and you feel the cool air on their backs, the warmth of the candle on their fronts. The contrast is pleasant, a small sensory detail that adds to the overall texture of the moment. You occasionally pause to smooth the paper with your palm, pressing out a wrinkle or a curl, and the paper makes a soft, sliding sound against the wood, a sound like a long, slow exhalation. The paper is cool to the touch at first, but it warms quickly under your hand, absorbing your heat the way the board does. The ink has a smell, as you have noticed before, but now, with the pen so close, the smell is stronger. It is a sharp, metallic odor, like iron filings or old nails, with an undertone of something organic, something like burnt sugar or crushed acorns. The smell comes from the iron gall, the main ingredient of the ink, which is made by mixing tannic acid from oak galls with ferrous sulfate. The reaction creates a dark, permanent compound that bonds chemically with the paper fibers. You know this from somewhere, perhaps from a conversation with a quartermaster or a passage in a book, but you do not think about the chemistry now. You just breathe in the smell, and it is a smell that means writing, a smell that means connection, a smell that means someone far away will soon hold this paper, and perhaps catch the same faint trace of iron. When the ink dries, the smell fades, but never entirely. There is always a ghost of it on the paper, a faint reminder of the liquid state. You flex your fingers, which have started to cramp slightly from the sustained grip. You set the pen down on the board, where it rolls a little before coming to rest against the edge of the ink bottle. You stretch your hand, opening and closing your fist, and you feel the small muscles in your palm and forearm relax. The pen has left a slight impression on your middle finger, a small reddened dent where the shaft has pressed during writing. This dent will fade in a few minutes, but it is a familiar sensation, a small discomfort that is part of the trade. You rub the spot with your thumb, feeling the skin there, slightly calloused from years of holding pens and tools. Your hands are not soft. They are a worker's hands, with rough patches on the palms and small scars on the knuckles. But they are capable of this fine, delicate work, and you take a quiet pride in their versatility. When you pick up the pen again, you notice the warmth it has absorbed from your hand. The wood is now the same temperature as your skin, and it feels almost like an extension of your body, a tool that has been used so long it is forgotten it is separate. You dip it again, and the ritual repeats, the click, the wipe, the bead of ink, the soft touch to paper. You write a few more lines, and you pay attention to the way the nib responds to different letters. A capital letter requires a broader stroke, a little more pressure, and the tines spread wider, releasing a heavier flow of ink that takes a moment longer to dry. A lowercase letter requires a lighter touch, and the nib glides with a faint, silky smoothness. Punctuation marks are quick, sharp jabs. A dot for a period, a quick, curved line for a comma, a slightly longer scratch for a dash. Each mark has its own feel, its own sound, its own small contribution to the rhythm of the writing. You experiment, just for a moment, with the pressure of your grip. If you hold the pen very loosely, almost letting it slip through your fingers, the line becomes faint and tremulous, a thin, wavering trace that looks like a spider's thread. If you grip it more firmly, the line thickens and darkens, but the nib starts to catch on the paper fibers, making a rougher sound and occasionally spattering tiny droplets of ink. You find the middle ground, the sweet spot, and you settle back into it, the pen moving with a comfortable automatic ease. The act of writing is a balance of forces, the downward pressure of your hand, the upward resistance of the paper, the sideways flow of the ink, the capillary action that draws the liquid down the slit, the surface tension that holds the bead at the tip. All these forces work together in a quiet, invisible harmony, and you are the conductor, guiding them with small, unconscious adjustments. The words themselves begin to emerge with a life of their own. You write about the feel of the pen, as if you are explaining it to the recipient, describing the smooth wood and the sharp nib and the soft, scratching sound. You write about the paper, its color and texture, the way it crinkles slightly when you fold it. You write about the ink, its smell, and its dark, glossy flow. In describing these things, you realize that you are not just writing a letter, you are sharing the moment itself, transporting a piece of this tent, this night, this quiet hour, across the miles. The sensory details become a kind of bridge, a way for the reader to sit beside you in the candlelight, to feel the same wood under their own imagined fingers, to hear the same soft sounds. This thought pleases you, and you write a little more slowly, savoring each word. The candle gutters very slightly as a draft finds it, and a light flickers across the page. The shadows of your hand and pen jump and dance, and for a second the writing becomes harder, the paper harder to see. Then the flame steadies and the light returns, and you continue. The brief interruption has left a small smudge on the side of your hand, a faint grey mark where your skin touched the still damp ink of a word you wrote a moment ago. You pause and look at the smudge, rubbing it with your thumb. It has not come off, but it will fade over the next day or two, joining the other stains. You dip the pen again, and the sound of the nib on the rim seems louder now, in the wake of the flicker, a small, reassuring noise that says the ritual continues. You feel the roughness of the paper's edge against your forearm as you write near the bottom of the sheet. The edge is not cut perfectly straight, it has a slight decal, a wavy, uneven border left from the paper-making mold. This decal is a reminder that the paper was made by hand, sheet by sheet, by someone who dipped a mold into a vat of pulp and shook it to form the layer. You run a finger along the edge, feeling the soft, feathered roughness, and you imagine that person standing in a paper mill somewhere, doing the same repetitive motion hour after hour. There is a connection there, a link of handcraft between the papermaker and you, the writer. The papermaker gave you a surface, and you are giving it words. Together, you are creating something that did not exist before. The board shifts slightly on your knees, and you adjust it, lifting it a fraction of an inch and settling it back down. The wood makes a soft, dull thump against your thighs, a sound that is absorbed by the wool fabric. The candlelight catches the edge of the board, highlighting the small parallel saw marks that the carpenter left when he cut the pine. These marks are a record of another hand, another tool, and you trace them with your fingernail, a small idle gesture that gives you a moment of rest. Then you return to the pen, dipping it again, the ink bottle now slightly warmer to the touch because you have held it several times tonight. As you write the final lines of this section, you become aware of the cumulative effect of all these small sensations. They have woven together into a single, unified experience, a state of calm focus that is almost meditative. The feel of the pen, the sound of the nib, the smell of the ink, the texture of the paper, the weight of the board, the warmth of the candle, all of them are present at once, and you are at the center of them, a still point in a turning world. You finish a sentence and set the pen down, flexing your fingers once more, and you look at the words you have written. They are a little uneven in places, a little smudged, but they are yours, and they carry the imprint of this moment in every stroke. You fold the paper carefully and set it aside, and the quiet of the tent settles around you like a soft, familiar cloak. The candle burns on, steady and low, and the letter lies half-written on the board. You set the pen down for a moment and let your hands rest in your lap, the fingers still curled slightly from the grip. The tent is quiet, filled only with the soft hiss of the flame and the distant, constant hum of the crickets. In this stillness, without any effort or intention, a series of gentle images begins to drift into your mind, one after another, like leaves floating on a slow current. They are not memories you have summoned. They arrive on their own, soft and unbidden, carrying the textures and colors of a place far away. You do not hold on to them tightly, but you let them come, and you let them stay for a while, and they fill the tent with a quiet, familiar presence. A kitchen table surfaces first, a plain wooden table in a room that is warm and bright. The morning sun comes through a window to the east, and it falls across the table in a broad golden rectangle, the light full of tiny dancing dust motes that drift and swirl without pattern. The tabletop is made of wide pine boards that have been scrubbed so many times the grain has risen in soft ridges, and the edges are rounded and smooth from years of hands resting there, elbows leaning, plates being set down and lifted again. You can almost feel the wood under your fingers, a surface that is cool in the morning before the day's heat arrives, slightly rough where a patch of the original varnish has worn thin near the center. The light catches a small dark knot in one of the boards, a tight circular swirl that looks like an eye, and you recall tracing that knot with your fingertip when you were a child, absent-minded and half listening to the adult conversation around you. The chairs around the table are mismatched, one with a woven rush seat that has begun to sag in the middle, another with a straight ladder back that creaks when you lean back too far. The table itself smells faintly of flour and wood polish, and the old clean scent of a room that is swept every morning. In this memory, the kitchen is quiet, the stove not yet lit for the day, and the only sound is the soft ticking of a clock on the mantel, a steady, unhurried rhythm that matches the beating of your own heart. Then the image shifts, and you see the garden just beyond the kitchen door. It is a small patch of ground, maybe 20 feet square, fenced with split rails to keep out the deer and rabbits. The soil there is dark and rich, turned over each spring with a spade and a great deal of patient effort, and it has a smell that is both damp and sweet, the smell of earth that is full of living things. In your mind, you walk along the narrow path between the rows, your bare feet sinking slightly into the cool dirt, and you see the beans climbing their poles, the green vines spiraling upward in tight, determined coils. The leaves are broad and slightly fuzzy, and when you brush against them, they release a faint green scent, like fresh-cut grass but softer. The tomato plants are staked with rough branches, their stems thick and knobby, and the fruits are just beginning to show a blush of color among the leaves. You remember the feel of a ripe tomato in your hand, warm from the sun, the skin so taut it seems ready to split. There is a row of carrots with their feathery tops waving in the breeze, and a patch of lettuce that has begun to bolt, sending up tall, spindly stalks with small yellow flowers. The work of weeding this garden comes back to you as a slow, repetitive pleasure, kneeling in the dirt with a small trowel, working the blade around the base of each plant, pulling the invaders out by their roots and shaking the soil free before tossing them into a bucket. The sun is warm on the back of your neck, and the air is full of the buzzing of bees that move from flower to flower with a low, steady drone. Time moves differently in the garden, not in hours but in the progress of the plants, the slow climb of the beans, the gradual swelling of the squash. There is no hurry there, only the patient, ongoing rhythm of growth and care. As the garden fades, another image takes its place, a rocking chair on a wooden porch. The chair is painted green, a shade of green that was once bright but has now faded and cracked under the weather, revealing patches of grey wood beneath. The paint flakes off in small, brittle chips if you pick at it with your fingernail, and the surface feels slightly rough to the touch. The rockers are curved and worn on the bottom from years of moving back and forth across the porch boards, and they make a gentle, rhythmic creak when the chair is in motion, a sound that is as much a part of the house as the ticking of the clock. You see yourself sitting in that chair, or perhaps someone you love sitting there. The motion slow and steady, a back and forth that soothes without demanding anything. The view from the porch is of a sloping field that leads down to a line of trees, and in the distance, on a clear day, you can see the blue smudge of hills. In the evening, the porch is a place for resting, for watching the fireflies come out in the grass, their small lights blinking on and off in a random, gentle pattern. The air on the porch carries the scent of the honeysuckle that grows along the railing, a sweet, heavy perfume that intensifies as the dusk deepens. You can hear the distant lowing of a cow from the barn and the last bird settling into the trees with a series of soft, chattering calls. The rocking chair moves and the world slows down and nothing needs to be done. The barn itself appears now, a large wooden structure with a roof that slopes down low on either side. The wood is grey and weathered, silvered by the sun and rain until it looks like the hide of an old elephant. The great doors slide open on iron tracks, and the sound they make is a deep, rolling rumble that you can feel in your chest. Inside, the barn is dim and cool, lit only by the slits of light that come through the gaps between the boards. The air is thick with the smell of hay, a dry, sweet scent that is both dusty and clean. The hay is stacked in bales up to the rafters, and when you climb into the loft, the loose straw prickles against your skin and gets into your hair. You remember lying on your back in that loft, looking up at the underside of the roof, the patterns of the shingles, the cobwebs that hang like grey lace from the beams. The dust motes float in the shafts of sunlight, thousands of them, and they move in slow, lazy currents when you wave your hand. Below, in the stalls, the animals stir and breathe. The cow stands in her stall, a large, gentle creature with a brown and white hide, her eyes soft and dark and fringed with long lashes. Her flank rises and falls with each breath, a slow, steady rhythm, and she turns her head to look at you with a calm, incurious gaze. The stool where you sit to milk her is a small three-legged thing, warm smooth by use, and the sound of the milk streaming into the bucket is a tinny, rhythmic ping that echoes slightly in the quiet barn. The cow's udder is warm and soft, and the milk smells sweet and fresh. The barn cat, a grey tabby with a missing ear, whines between your legs and purrs with a sound like a small engine, hoping for a squirt of milk. In the corner, a few hens scratch in the straw, clucking softly to themselves, their feathers puffed against the cool air. The barn is a place of quiet industry, of animal warmth and the slow turning of seasons, and it holds you in its dusty, peaceful embrace. Another image surfaces, gentler still, an apple tree that stands at the edge of the yard, its trunk gnarled and twisted, its branches spreading wide like the arms of a dancer. The bark is rough and dark, with deep fissures that run vertically, and patches of silver-green lichen grow on the north side. In the spring, the tree is covered with pale pink blossoms that fill the air with a delicate, honey-like fragrance, and the petals fall like snow when the wind blows, carpeting the grass in a soft, white blanket. By late summer, the apples hang heavy on the boughs, red and green and streaked with yellow, and the branches bend under their weight. You recall climbing that tree, finding the footholds in the bark, pulling yourself up to sit in the crook of a branch with your back against the trunk. From there, you could see the whole farm laid out below you, the house, the garden, the barn, the field beyond. The apples within reach were slightly tart, with a crisp, juicy flesh that snapped when you bit into them. The ones that had fallen lay in the grass, some bruised and pecked by birds, others whole and perfect, waiting to be gathered into a basket. The ladder used for picking was a tall wooden thing with rungs worn smooth in the middle, and it leaned against the tree with a slight, reassuring wobble. The memory of the apple tree brings with it the feeling of a late afternoon in early autumn, the light golden and slanted, the air cool enough for a light jacket, the whole world quiet and still and full of a gentle, melancholy sweetness. These images flow into one another without sharp edges, and now you find yourself standing by the well pump in the side yard. The pump is made of cast iron, painted green once, but now mostly rusted to a deep reddish brown, and it stands on a concrete platform that has cracked in a few places with tufts of grass pushing through. The handle is long and heavy, and it takes a fair amount of effort to work it up and down, especially before the water comes. You remember the sound the pump makes, a dry, squeaking groan at first, then a wetter, more rhythmic chuff as the water begins to rise, and finally the rush of cold, clear water pouring from the spout into the bucket below. The water is so cold it makes your teeth ache, and it tastes of iron and stone and something ancient, something that comes from deep underground. You would prime the pump by pouring a little water from a can into the top to seal the leather gasket, and the water would disappear into the mechanism with a soft gulping sound. Then the pumping would begin, and the handle would move up and down, a steady repetitive motion that made your shoulder muscles burn after a while. In the winter, the pump would freeze, and you would have to pour boiling water over it to thaw it, the steam rising in a thick cloud. But in your memory it is summer, and the pump works freely, and the water splashes onto your bare feet, and the grass around the platform is green and wet. You would drink from a tin cup that hung on a wire by the spout, and the water would be so cold it made your chest ache pleasantly. A fireplace appears now, a large stone hearth in the main room of the house. The stones are grey and brown, fitted together with a mortar that has crumbled a little in places, and the mantel is a single, thick slab of oak that has been darkened by smoke and age. In the winter, a fire would burn there every day, and the smell of wood smoke permeated everything. The furniture, the curtains, the clothes in the closets. You remember sitting on the floor in front of that fire, the heat so intense on your face that you had to turn away after a while, the logs hissing and popping as the sap boiled out of them. The flames would wrap around a thick hickory log with a slow, sinuous motion, the bark turning black and curling away, the wood beneath glowing a deep, pulsating red. The coals would build up underneath, a bed of orange embers that shifted and settled with a soft, tinkling sound. There was a specific log, the back log, that was large and dense, and would burn all night, and in the morning it would still be there, a blackened, charred mass with a few stubborn flames licking along its surface. On the hearth, a cast-iron kettle hung from a crane, and it would simmer for hours, releasing a thin plume of steam that smelled of whatever stew or soup was inside. The firelight would dance across the ceiling, and the shadows would move in a slow, hypnotic pattern that was better than any picture. Outside, the wind might howl and the snow might pile against the door, but inside, by the fire, everything was warm and still and safe. A quieter memory follows, the sound of rain on the roof at night. You are lying in a bed with a thick feather mattress and a quilt made of many small coloured squares, each one stitched by hand. The room is dark except for the faint glow of a nightlight or a moon behind clouds. The rain begins as a few scattered drops, a soft, irregular tapping on the wooden shingles above, then it builds to a steady, drumming rhythm, a million small impacts that blend together into a single, continuous sound. The water runs down the slope of the roof and drips off the eaves, a slower, more liquid beat that marks the edge of the downpour. Sometimes the wind drives the rain against the window pane, and the drops streak down the glass in little rivulets that catch what light there is. The sound is enveloping, a blanket of noise that covers everything and makes the bed feel even warmer and drier by contrast. You would burrow deeper under the quilt and listen, and the rain would wash away all your thoughts, leaving only the simple animal comfort of shelter and warmth. In the morning the world would smell clean and new, the dust settled, the leaves glistening, but for now, in the dark, the rain was the only thing that existed. And now a small specific detail returns, the old dog that slept under the porch. He was a hound of some kind, with long, floppy ears and a coat that was a patchwork of brown and black and white. His name was something simple, a one-syllable sound, and he would thump his tail on the ground whenever you approached, a slow, lazy wag that stirred up small puffs of dust. He slept most of the day curled into a tight ball with his nose tucked under his tail, and his breathing was deep and even, a soft, snuffling sound that occasionally broke into a dream whimper as his legs twitched. You remember the feel of his fur, short and dense and slightly oily, and the way his ears were as soft as old velvet. He would follow you on walks around the farm, keeping a steady pace a few steps behind, and when you stopped, he would stop too, his nose investigating a patch of grass or a fence post with a thorough, unhurried interest. He was not a demanding animal. He asked only for a pat on the head, and a bowl of water, and a place to sleep in the shade. His presence was a constant, quiet background note in the symphony of home, a small, warm life that shared your space without fuss. These memories do not come with any sharp pangs of longing. They are simply present, filling the tent like the scent of the candle. You let them drift and overlap, the kitchen table blending into the garden into the barn into the rain on the roof. They are pieces of a world that continues to exist, turning through its days and seasons without you. The clock still ticks on the mantel, the apple tree still drops its fruit, the old dog still sleeps under the porch. Knowing this, you feel a quiet connection, a thread that runs from this small canvas tent all the way back to that kitchen, that porch, that rain-swept roof. The distance is large, but the thread is strong, and it hums with a silent, steady music. You open your eyes, which you did not realize you had closed, and you look at the candle. The flame is still there, unchanged, and the tent is still quiet. The letter waits on the board, its words half-written, and you pick up the pen again. The memories have not left you. They linger at the edges of your awareness, a soft, warm presence that will stay with you through the rest of the night. You dip the pen and write a few words about the apple tree, about the rain on the roof, about the way the kitchen table looked in the morning light. The words flow easily, carrying the images with them, and as you write, the distance between you and home seems to shrink a little, folded into the paper and the ink and the steady glow of the candle that burns on, patient and calm, into the deep, quiet hours. The day that has just ended began, as all your days begin, with the sound of a bugle cutting through the last thin layer of sleep. The notes came from somewhere near the center of camp, a series of quick, bright calls that climbed up the scale and then held a long, wavering note before falling away. The bugle was not close. It was distant enough that the sound had softened by the time it reached your tent, the sharp edges worn off by the morning mist and the rows of canvas between you and the musician. You opened your eyes to the grey light that filtered through the fabric walls, a light that was neither dark nor bright, the color of unbleached cotton just before sunrise. The air inside the tent was cool and still, and your breath made a faint, visible puff that dissolved almost immediately. For a moment, you lay perfectly still on your bedroll, feeling the straw rustle beneath you as your chest rose and fell. The wool blanket was heavy and warm, and the part of you that was still half asleep wanted nothing more than to pull it over your head and ignore the bugle entirely. But the habit of discipline was stronger than the pull of sleep, and you sat up slowly, the blanket falling from your shoulders to pool in your lap. The first thing you did was rub your face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble on your cheeks and the slight puffiness around your eyes. Then you swung your legs over the side of the bedroll and placed your bare feet on the ground cloth, the canvas cool and smooth under your soles. The tent was just tall enough for you to stand if you hunched slightly, and you rose with a soft groan, your joints stiff from a night on the hard-packed earth. You pulled on your boots, the leather cold and a little damp, and laced them slowly, the laces making a soft, whisking sound as you drew them through the eyelets. Your jacket went on next, the walls smelling faintly of wood smoke and your own sweat, and you buttoned it up with fingers that were still clumsy from sleep. The routine was so familiar that you could have done it in complete darkness, and in fact you often did, on mornings when reveille came even earlier. Outside the tent, the camp was stirring. You pushed the flap aside and stepped into the open air, and the coolness of the morning hit your face with a pleasant shock. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, with streaks of pink and gold low on the eastern horizon, where the sun was beginning to think about rising. The grass was wet with dew, and your boots left dark prints as you walked toward the company street, the wide lane that ran between the rows of tents. Other men were emerging too, their faces blank with sleep, their hair disheveled. Some nodded to you, others said nothing, and the silence of the early morning was broken only by the occasional cough or the sound of a tin cup being shaken dry. The air had a clean, rinsed smell, the smell of dew evaporating and dust settling overnight, and under it all was the faint, ever-present odor of wood smoke from the banked cook fires. You joined the line that was forming near the cook tent, a long, straggling queue of men holding tin cups and plates. The line moved slowly, and you shuffled forward a few steps at a time, your stomach making small, empty noises. The cook was a large man with a stained apron and a ladle that never stopped moving. When you reached the front, he filled your cup with a dark, steaming liquid that was called coffee by courtesy, though it tasted mostly of chicory and charred oak. The coffee was hot, and you wrapped both hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers which had grown cold in the morning air. You took a sip, and the bitterness spread across your tongue, a familiar, bracing bitterness that helped to push the last cobwebs of sleep out of your mind. Along with the coffee, you received a piece of hardtack, a square cracker that was pale and dense and nearly impervious to teeth. You tucked the hardtack into your pocket for later, knowing that it would soften if you soaked it in the coffee, turning into a chewy, edible paste that tasted of flour and salt, and not much else. The morning drill began shortly after the coffee, when the sun had cleared the horizon and the shadows had begun to shorten. You assembled with the rest of your company on the parade ground, a wide, flat field that had been trampled to bare dirt by countless boots. The field was dusty, and the dust rose in small puffs every time you moved. The sergeant stood in front of the formation, a stocky man with a voice that carried without being loud, a voice worn rough by years of giving commands in the open air. He called out the orders in a steady, monotonous rhythm: right shoulder shift, left foot forward, about face. The words came one after another with a measured, unhurried pace, and you moved your body in response without thinking, your muscles remembering the patterns even when your mind drifted elsewhere. The drill was not complicated. It was the same set of movements you had performed 100 times before, the same turns and steps and shifts of weight. The repetition was the point. The sergeant's voice droned on, and your feet made a soft, rhythmic scuffing on the dirt, and the sun climbed a little higher, and the shadows grew a little shorter. During a pause in the drill, you stood at ease and let your gaze wander. The field stretched away to a line of trees that marked the edge of the camp, their leaves a dusty green in the morning light. Above the trees, the sky was a deep, cloudless blue, the kind of blue that seems to go on forever. A few birds wheeled overhead, their calls thin and distant. You could feel the sweat beginning to prickle on your forehead and the back of your neck, and you wiped it away with your sleeve, the wool rough against your skin. The sergeant called the formation back to attention, and the drill resumed. Another turn, another march, another halt. The movements flowed into one another with a kind of dull grace, a slow, collective dance that served no immediate purpose but to fill the morning hours. When the drill finally ended, the sun was well up, and the heat of the day was beginning to assert itself. You were dismissed with a single flat word, and the formation broke apart, the men scattering toward their tents or the shade of the few trees that dotted the camp. Midday brought the main meal, such as it was. You collected your ration from the company cook, a piece of salt pork that was grayish-pink and glistening with fat, a square of hardtack, and a small withered potato that had been boiled in the same pot as the meat. You carried your plate to a spot in the shade of a supply wagon, where you sat with your back against a wheel and ate slowly. The salt pork was tough and intensely salty, and you had to chew each bite for a long time before you could swallow it. The saltiness made your tongue tingle and your thirst grow, and you drank from your canteen between bites, the water tasting of metal and the faint, musty flavor of the canvas bag. The potato was soft and bland, and you mashed it with your fork and mixed it with a little of the pork fat to give it some flavor. The hardtack you had soaked in your coffee earlier was now a soft, spongy mass that you ate with your fingers, and it filled the corners of your stomach in a satisfying way. The meal was not large, and it was not particularly good, but it was enough, and you felt the slow, steady energy of the food spreading through your body as you sat in the shade and let the afternoon stretch out before you. The hottest part of the day was given over to equipment maintenance, a task that was as repetitive and soothing as the drill. You found a spot near your tent where you could sit with your back against a canvas ridgepole, and you gathered your musket, a cleaning rag, a small tin of oil, and the ramrod with its cleaning jag. The musket was a long, heavy piece of wood and iron, its stock worn smooth in the places where your hands had gripped it during many drills and marches. You held it across your knees and began the slow process of cleaning. First you removed the lock plate, A flat piece of metal that held the hammer and the firing mechanism, and you set it carefully on a piece of cloth beside you. The interior of the lock was dark with powder residue, a fine black dust that clung to the metal and smelled of sulfur and charcoal. You dipped the corner of the rag in a little water and wiped away the residue, the cloth coming away black, and you repeated the motion again and again until the metal was clean and bright. The motion was small and precise, a gentle circular rubbing that required patience but not thought. The sun was warm on your shoulders, and the shade of the tent was just enough to keep the heat from becoming oppressive. After the lot was clean, you turned your attention to the barrel. You poured a small amount of water down the muzzle and then threaded the cleaning jag onto the end of the ramrod, wrapping it with a fresh patch of cloth. You slid the ramrod into the barrel, a long, smooth motion that met a slight resistance from the wet patch, and you pushed it all the way down to the breech. Then you pulled it back out, and the patch came away dark with fouling. You repeated this process several times, each time with a fresh patch, until the patches emerged only slightly grey. The ramrod made a soft, metallic scraping sound as it moved inside the barrel, and the rhythm of the motion was steady and calming. Push, pull, inspect, replace the patch, push again. When the barrel was clean, you oiled it with a few drops from the tin, the oil spreading in a thin golden film that would protect the metal from rust. You wiped down the exterior of the barrel and the stock, removing the dust and the faint fingerprints that had accumulated. And when you were finished, the musket gleamed with a quiet, understated shine. You set it aside on a clean cloth, and the satisfaction of the completed task settled over you like a light blanket. The late afternoon was a time for rest, a slow, empty stretch of hours that you filled with small, idle activities. You sat in the shade and watched the camp move around you. A group of men were playing cards on a blanket spread under a tree, their voices low and their laughter soft and infrequent. Another man was writing a letter, hunched over a board much like yours, his pen moving with a slow, deliberate scratch. A few soldiers were sleeping, their hats pulled down over their eyes, their chests rising and falling in the deep, regular rhythm of afternoon naps. A wagon rolled by on the company road, its wheels creaking and grinding against the dry ruts. The driver slouched on the seat with the reins loose in his hands. Dust rose in a pale cloud behind the wheels and settled slowly, as if the dust itself was too tired to stay airborne. You turned your attention to the sky, leaning your head back against the canvas and letting your gaze drift upward. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, bleached by the afternoon heat, and a few small clouds hung motionless on the horizon. They were the puffy white kind, the kind that looked like piles of cotton batting, and they changed shape so slowly that you could not see the change happening, only its results when you looked away and then looked back again. One cloud that had been shaped like a crouching animal gradually stretched into a long, thin streak, and another that had been round and compact dissolved into a series of smaller puffs that scattered like sheep across the blue pasture. Watching the clouds was an activity that required no effort and produced no result. It was simply a way of letting time pass, of letting your mind empty out after the small exertions of the morning. The heat made the edges of the world shimmer a little, a faint, wavering distortion that made the distant trees seem to dance. A hawk circled high overhead, a tiny dark cross that glided on an updraft without moving its wings, and he watched it until it became a speck and then vanished entirely into the blue. As the afternoon wore on, the light began to change. The harsh white glare of midday softened into a warm golden glow that stretched the shadows long across the ground. The temperature dropped a few degrees, just enough to make the air feel pleasant again, and a faint breeze began to stir from the direction of the ridge. You sat up a little straighter and stretched your arms over your head, feeling the pull in your shoulders and the satisfying pop of a vertebra in your lower back. The camp was waking up from its afternoon slumber. Men were moving about again, fetching water, starting the evening cook fires, calling to each other in voices that were still slow and relaxed. The smell of wood smoke began to drift through the tents, a sharper, fresher scent than the stale smoke of the morning, and with it came the sound of a spoon stirring a pot, a soft, rhythmic clanking that was as much a part of the evening as the bugle was a part of the morning. You took a walk through the camp as the sun continued its slow descent. Your boots crunched on the dry grass and the occasional loose stone, and you nodded to the men you passed, receiving nods in return. You passed the horse picket line, where the animals stood with their heads down, their tails swishing slowly to shoo away the flies that were beginning to thin out as the evening cooled. One of the horses, a large bay with a white blaze on its forehead, turned its head to watch you pass, its dark eye calm and unblinking. You paused and reached out a hand, and the horse sniffed your fingers with a soft, whiskery muzzle, its breath warm and grassy. You patted its neck, feeling the solid, living warmth of the animal under your palm, and then you moved on, past the supply wagons, past the makeshift blacksmith forge that was now cold and silent, past the hospital tent with its flaps tied back to let in the fresh air. Everywhere the camp was settling into its evening rhythm, a rhythm that was slower and gentler than the brisk pace of the morning. The sunset itself was a quiet affair, a slow bleeding of color across the western sky. The pale blue deepened to a richer hue, and the clouds that had been white all day turned pink and orange and a soft bruised purple. The light caught the tops of the tents and made them glow for a few minutes, a warm rosy glow that was almost like the light of a candle, and then it faded, and the tents turned grey, and the sky turned violet, and the first stars began to prick through the fabric of the darkening dome. You stood near your tent and watched the transition, the slow shift from day to night, and you felt the familiar, quiet peace of the evening settling over you. The work was done, the heat was gone, and the long, empty hours of the night stretched out ahead, full of stillness and cricket song, and the small, steady flame of a candle. This was the day that had just ended, a day without great event or sharp emotion, a day composed entirely of small, ordinary moments strung together like beads on a string. You had woken, you had drunk coffee, you had marched and cleaned and eaten and rested and watched the clouds and the sunset, and now you were here, in the tent, with the candle burning, and the letter half written, and the night wrapping itself around the camp like a soft, heavy cloak. The day was over, and it had been, in every particular, a perfectly unremarkable day, the kind of day that makes up the bulk of a life, and you were content to let it go, to let it drift into memory, to make room for the quiet hours that were still to come. The tent has its own smell, a quiet, layered presence that you notice only when you stop moving and let the stillness settle around you. It is not a single scent, but a careful blend of several, each one distinct yet woven so tightly into the others that they become one thing, a single, comforting atmosphere that fills the small space from the ground cloth to the ridge pole. You sit on the wooden crate with the board across your knees and the candle burning beside you, and you breathe in slowly, deliberately, letting the air carry its invisible cargo into your lungs. The inhale is long and steady, and the exhale is longer still, a soft, whispering release that stirs the flame just enough to make it bow its head before straightening again. The smells do not demand your attention. They simply exist, patient and unchanging, a background to the quiet scratch of the pen and the distant hum of the crickets. The ink is the sharpest note in the tent, a metallic tang that rises from the open bottle and from the drying words on the paper. It is a smell that catches at the back of your nose, clean and astringent, like the scent of a handful of old iron nails that have been left out in the rain. There is something ancient in it, something that speaks of oak galls crushed and soaked and fermented, of copperous crystals dissolved in water, of a chemical reaction that turns liquid into permanence. When you lean close to the paper, the ink smell intensifies, a sharp, almost medicinal odor that clears your head and makes you feel alert without being harsh. It is the smell of thought made visible, of words captured and held fast. As the ink dries, the sharpness fades into a softer, earthier scent, a faint reminder of the forest floor where the oak trees dropped their galls, a dark, loamy undertone that lingers on the paper long after the gloss has gone. You bring the paper close to your face and inhale, and the smell is both familiar and strange. A small, concentrated dose of the writing process that connects you to every letter you have ever written and every letter you will write. Beneath the ink, or perhaps alongside it, is the warm, savory scent of the burning tallow candle. The tallow is made from rendered animal fat, and when it burns it releases a smell that is faintly meaty, like a stew that has been simmering on a low fire for many hours, the kind of stew that fills the kitchen with a rich golden aroma that clings to the curtains and the wooden beams. The scent is not strong. It is a subtle background warmth, a gentle reminder of the living creatures that provided the fat, the cattle and sheep whose bodies have been transformed into light. There is a slight smokiness to it as well, a thin, acrid edge that comes from the wick as it chars and curls, and this smokiness mixes with the meaty scent to create something that is both comforting and slightly wild. It reminds you of a fireplace on a winter evening, of a pot hanging from a crane, of the soft, steady glow of coals. The tallow smell wraps around you like a thin blanket, not heavy but persistent, a constant companion to the candle's light. When the flame flickers, the smell intensifies for a moment, a little puff of hot, fragrant air that rises from the wax pool and then fades back into the steady, ongoing hum. The canvas itself has a smell that is older and drier than the others, the smell of raw cotton and dust and long exposure to sun and rain. It is the smell of a sail that has been folded in a boathouse for an entire winter, a smell of salt and mildew and the faint, clean bitterness of the fibers themselves. The canvas was once a pale, sandy color, but months of weather have darkened it to a deeper tan, and the smell has deepened along with the color. When you brush against the tent wall, the fabric releases a small puff of its scent, a dry, papery odor that is almost like the smell of an old book opened after years on a shelf. There is dust trapped in the weave, fine particles of the road and the field, and this dust adds its own note, a chalky, mineral dryness that makes you think of limestone and dry riverbeds. The canvas also carries a faint trace of the oil that was used to waterproof it, a thin, linseed-like smell that has mostly faded but still lingers in the seams and the corners, a ghost of the day the tent was new. All these elements combine into a single, quiet background that you notice only when you pause to notice it, a smell that is so much a part of the tent that it would be strange to be without it. The ground cloth beneath your feet and under the bedroll contributes its own layer to the atmosphere. It is a heavy piece of canvas or rubberized cloth laid directly on the earth, and it smells of soil and grass and the faint, sweet decay of last year's leaves. The earth beneath the tent is alive with tiny, invisible processes, the slow work of worms and beetles and the endless, patient growth of roots, and the ground cloth captures a hint of that subterranean activity, a cool, damp breath that seeps up through the fabric. When you shift your weight on the crate, the ground cloth crinkles softly, and the movement releases a small pocket of air that smells of damp clay and the deep mineral richness of the soil. It is not an unpleasant smell, it is the smell of the ground itself, the smell of a cellar or a cave, a smell that is cool and dark and slightly sweet. It grounds you, this sense, reminding you that just below your feet the earth continues its slow, eternal work, unconcerned with the temporary structures that sit upon it. From outside the tent, a faint thread of wood smoke drifts in through the gaps under the flaps, a smell that is sharper and more acrid than the tallow, full of the memory of burning oak and hickory. The evening cook fires are dying down now, their flames reduced to beds of glowing coals that send up thin, wavering ribbons of smoke, and these ribbons wander through the camp on the night breeze, touching each tent in turn. The wood smoke carries with it the scent of whatever was cooked over the fire, a faint, savory residue of salt pork and boiled potatoes, and the bitter char of burned coffee grounds. There is also a sweetness in it, a surprising, almost fruity note that comes from the sap in the green wood, a scent that reminds you of roasting apples even though there are no apples here. The sweetness is fleeting, a brief, bright spark that flares and then disappears into the heavier, smokier base, and you catch it only if you are paying close attention. The wood smoke drifts through the tent and then moves on, leaving behind a faint, pleasant sharpness that settles into the fabric of the canvas and the wool of your blanket, a smell that will still be there in the morning when you wake. Your own clothing adds a deeply personal note to the blend, a smell that is so familiar you no longer consciously register it, but that is always present, a quiet signature of your own body. The wool of your uniform jacket and trousers has a smell that is part lanolin, the natural oil of the sheep's fleece, a smell that is slightly greasy and slightly sweet, like the scent of a clean animal. Over the lanolin, there is the smell of your own sweat, a mild salty tang that has dried into the fibers after long days of marching and working, and this is not an unpleasant smell at all, but a simple, honest smell of human effort. The wool also carries the faint alkaline scent of the lye soap you used to wash it last, a smell that is clean and sharp and a little harsh, like the smell of a scrubbed wooden floor. There are other, smaller traces as well, the metallic ghost of gunpowder from the cartridges you handled, the dusty, grassy residue of the fields you walked through, the faint, sweetish smell of the straw in your bedroll that has transferred itself to your trousers as you slept. All these personal scents combine into a single, cohesive whole that is simply the smell of you, and it blends with the other smells of the tent so completely that there is no clear line where one ends and the next begins. You become aware of a subtle sweetness in the air, a note that is so faint you almost miss it, and you realize it is coming from the straw that fills your mattress sack. The straw was cut from a field of oats or wheat some months ago, and it still holds a trace of its original life, a dry, grassy sweetness that is like the smell of a hayloft on a hot afternoon. When you move on the crate, the straw in the bedroll rustles softly, and the movement releases a small puff of this sweetness, a scent that is golden and warm and full of the memory of sun. It reminds you of harvest time, of wagons piled high with sheaves, of the rhythmic sound of a scythe swinging through the stalks. The sweetness is gentle and fleeting, and it fades quickly back into the other smells, but for a moment it is there, a small bright thread in the fabric of the tent. The ink bottle itself has a smell when you bring it close to your nose, a smell that is more concentrated and complex than the drying ink on the page. The glass bottle is cool and smooth, and its cork stopper is stained a deep, permanent black from long contact with the liquid inside. When you pull the cork, the smell rushes out in a concentrated wave, the sharp, metallic bite of the iron gall, a faint, vinegary sourness from the fermentation of the galls, and a deeper, almost nutty undertone that comes from the gum arabic added to thicken the ink. The gum arabic has a smell that is slightly sweet and slightly resinous, like the sap of a tree dried in the sun, and it rounds out the harshness of the iron, softening it into something more complex. You hold the open bottle under your nose for a moment, breathing in the layers, and then you cork it again and set it aside, the smell still tingling faintly in your nostrils. The candle, too, has a different smell when it is unlit, a cooler, greasier scent that you notice when you pick up the stub to examine it. The tallow is slightly soft to the touch, and it leaves a faint oily residue on your fingertips, a smell that is like the smell of a kitchen after a meal has been prepared, the lingering ghost of rendered fat cooled in a pan. The wick smells of charred cotton, a thin, smoky scent that is dry and papery, and the tin plate underneath has a faint metallic smell, the smell of tin and old wax and the dusty air of the tent. When the candle is burning, these dormant smells are transformed by the heat, released into the air in a constant, gentle stream. But when it is cold, they are quiet and still, waiting for the match to wake them. You notice how the smells in the tent change slightly with the movement of the air. When the breeze stirs outside and pushes a gentle draft under the canvas walls, the tent fills for a moment with the cooler, fresher smell of the night. A smell of damp grass and clean, cold air, and the distant, watery scent of the stream. This fresh air cuts through the layered indoor smells like a thin, clear blade, and for a few seconds everything is brighter and sharper. Then the breeze dies and the tent smells close back in around you, the ink and the tallow and the canvas and the straw reassembling themselves into the familiar, comfortable blend. The flame of the candle bends and flickers during these small intrusions, and the smoke from the wick adds a brief, acrid note to the air before settling back into its steady, savory warmth. The smell of the paper itself becomes apparent when you hold a fresh sheet close to your face, before any ink has touched it. It is a clean, dry smell, the smell of cotton rags that were beaten into pulp and pressed into sheets and hung to dry in a sunny loft. There is a faint, chalky undertone from the sizing that was added to make the paper less absorbent, a smell like crushed seashells or powdered limestone. The paper also carries the memory of the hands that made it, a faint, human warmth that lingers in the fibers, the smell of a paper mill somewhere far away where vats of pulp are stirred with long wooden paddles, and the air is thick with the mist of water and fiber. When you write on the paper, the ink smell overpowers this clean, dry scent, but in the margins, where the ink has not touched, the paper's own smell remains, a quiet, blank canvas waiting for words. Your blanket, which lies across your shoulders, has its own rich and complicated aroma, a smell that is part wool and part smoke and part the faint, sweet perfume of the outdoors. The wool itself has the lanolin scent you noticed in your uniform, but here it is stronger because the blanket is thicker and less frequently washed. The lanolin gives the wool a slightly oily animal warmth, a smell that is deeply comforting, like the smell of a sheep's fleece on a cold day. The wood smoke is stronger in the blanket as well, because you have sat by many fires with this blanket wrapped around you, and the fibers have absorbed the smoke until it has become a permanent part of the fabric. There is also a faint green smell of grass and leaves from the times you have spread the blanket on the ground to rest under a tree, and this green smell mixes with the smoke and the lanolin to create something that is both wild and domestic, a smell that speaks of open fields and warm hearths. As you sit in the quiet, you become aware of a smell that is so subtle it is almost not a smell at all. The clean, slightly moist scent of your own breath after you have been sitting still for a long time. A warm, human exhalation that mingles with the candle smoke and the ink. You breathe out slowly through your nose, and the air that leaves you carries the faintest trace of the coffee you drank this morning, a bitter, roasted ghost that still lingers somewhere deep inside. Your breath fogs the air just a little, a tiny invisible cloud, and then it dissipates into the larger atmosphere of the tent, becoming part of the whole. You think about how every exhale adds a little bit of yourself to this small, enclosed space, how the air you breathe now is the same air you have been breathing all evening, cycling through your lungs and out again, mixing with the tallow and the ink and the canvas and the straw, until there is no separation between you and the tent. You are breathing the tent, and the tent is breathing you. The combination of all these smells creates a single, unified effect that is greater than any one of its parts. It is a smell that says rest, that says this is a place where nothing needs to happen, a place of stillness and quiet and calm. It is the smell of a small, safe space carved out of the vast, dark night, a space where you can sit with your thoughts and your letter and your candle and simply be. The smell wraps around you like a second blanket, warm and familiar and profoundly reassuring. You close your eyes and breathe it in deeply, letting it fill your senses until there is nothing else. No sight, no sound, only the layered, gentle perfume of the tent at night. And when you open your eyes again, the candle is still burning, the ink is still drying, and the quiet goes on, deep and unbroken, into the slow, patient hours of the night. The wool blanket lies across your shoulders, and you become aware of its presence as a gentle, steady pressure that has been there all evening, waiting for you to notice it fully. The night has grown cooler, the air inside the tent now carrying a sharper edge that makes the candle's warmth feel smaller and more precious. You draw the blanket a little higher around your neck, and the coarse fibers brush against your chin with a familiar, slightly scratchy sensation that is not unpleasant, just a reminder that the wool is real and solid and doing its work. The weight of it settles across your back and shoulders like a pair of heavy, comforting hands, pressing down with an even, distributed pressure that seems to push the tension out of your muscles one by one. You roll your shoulders slightly, feeling the blanket shift with you, its folds resettling around your arms with a soft, whispering rustle, and then you are still again, letting the warmth gather underneath. The blanket is not new. It has been with you for many months, through many nights and many miles, and it shows the marks of its journey. The original color, a deep, dark grey-brown, has faded in places to a lighter, softer tone, especially along the fold lines where the fabric has been creased and recreased countless times. There are thin spots near the edges, where the yarn has begun to wear away from constant handling, and the small hole near one corner that you mended with a length of coarse thread, the stitches uneven but holding. The edges themselves are bound with a strip of cotton twill, a lighter tan color, and this binding is frayed in several places, the threads separating and curling into small fuzzy tufts that catch the candlelight. The blanket has a smell, as you've noticed before, a deep layered scent of wood smoke and lanolin, and the faint sweet grassiness of the fields where you have spread it to sit or sleep. But more than the smell, more than the appearance, it is the weight that matters most. The steady, reliable heaviness that makes the blanket feel like a thing of substance, a thing that can be trusted. You let your hands rest on the edges of the blanket, where it drapes over your thighs, and you feel the texture of the wool under your palms. The yarn is thick and loosely spun, with a slightly wiry quality that comes from the long, coarse fibers of the sheep's outer coat. These fibers are not soft like the fine wool of a scarf. They are rougher, more resilient, designed by nature to shed rain and wind. The weave is a simple plain weave, the warp and weft threads crossing over and under each other in a regular grid-like pattern that you can see if you hold the blanket up to the light. The gaps between the threads are small but visible, and when you stretch the fabric slightly, the light shines through in tiny pinpricks, a constellation of miniature stars. The surface of the blanket is slightly fuzzy, covered with a fine halo of loose fibers that have worked their way out of the yarn over time, and these fibers catch the candlelight and glow with a soft golden aura, making the blanket look almost warm to the touch. The weight of the blanket is not just a physical sensation, it is a kind of emotional weight as well, a weight of memory and association that presses down as gently as the wool itself. This blanket was issued to you at the start of your service, a standard issue piece of equipment like the musket and the canteen and the haversack, and it has been with you through every mile of marching, every night of sleeping on the ground. You remember the first night you used it, how stiff and scratchy it felt against your skin, how it smelled strongly of the dye and the wool oil, a sharp, chemical odor that has long since faded into the softer, more familiar scent of today. The blanket has absorbed the history of your journey, the dust of the roads, the dampness of the river crossings, the smoke of the campfires, the chill of the mountain passes. It holds those memories in its fibers, not in a way that you can consciously recall, but in a way that you can feel, a deep, accumulated sense of presence that makes the blanket more than just a piece of fabric. You pull the blanket tighter, crossing your arms over your chest and tucking your hands under the opposite edges, and the pressure increases, a firm, steady hug that makes your breathing slow and deepen. The warmth of your body, trapped under the wool, begins to build, creating a small private climate that is separate from the cool air of the tent. The wool fibers have a natural crimp, a waviness that creates tiny air pockets within the fabric, and these pockets trap the heat your body produces, holding it close so that you are surrounded by a layer of warmth that is your own. The blanket is not warm in itself, it is an insulator, a barrier, and it works by preventing the escape of heat rather than by generating any of its own. You learned this long ago in the cold of a winter camp, when you discovered that wrapping the blanket loosely around you was warmer than pulling it tight, because the loose folds created more air spaces, more insulation. Tonight you arranged the blanket with the same instinctive knowledge, letting it drape in generous folds that hang from your shoulders and pool in your lap, the extra fabric creating a thick, warm cocoon. The sensation of the blanket against your skin, where it touches your neck and the backs of your hands, is a mix of softness and scratchiness that you have come to find deeply reassuring. The wool prickles a little, the stiff fibers poking gently at your skin, but this prickle is not irritating. It is a reminder of the blanket's reality, its tangible, physical presence. It is a sensation that keeps you grounded in your body, connected to the moment, and it prevents your mind from drifting too far into abstraction. You run your fingers over the surface of the blanket, and you feel the slight bumps and ridges of the yarn, the occasional thicker spot where a slub was spun into the thread, the tiny knots where two lengths of yarn were tied together by the weaver. These imperfections are part of the blanket's character, part of its history, and they give it a handmade quality that no machine-made fabric could replicate. The blanket was likely woven on a hand loom in a small mill, by a weaver who sat at the shuttle for hours each day, throwing the thread back and forth with a steady, rhythmic motion. That weaver's work has traveled with you, has kept you warm, has become a part of your life in a way that the weaver could never have imagined. The fringe along the ends of the blanket is another texture to explore. The warp threads that were not woven into the fabric have been left loose, and they hang in a series of twisted strands, each one about an inch long. The fringe has become tangled over time, the strands knotting together and separating in a random, chaotic pattern that shifts every time you handle the blanket. You sometimes run your fingers through the fringe, untangling the knots with a slow, idle motion, the strands sliding against each other with a soft, dry whispering. The fringe is slightly lighter in color than the rest of the blanket because it has been less exposed to dirt and smoke, and it catches the light differently, appearing as a pale, silvery halo along the edges. The feel of the fringe is different from the feel of the main fabric. It is looser, more fluid, the individual threads moving independently, and it tickles your palm when you hold it. The blanket makes a sound when you move, a soft, rustling hush that is distinct from the sound of the canvas or the straw. It is a dry sound, a rubbing of wool against wool, and it seems to absorb other sounds rather than create new ones. When you shift on the crate, the blanket rustles with a series of soft, overlapping whispers, and then falls silent again. The sound is so quiet that it barely registers, but it is part of the overall texture of the night, part of the soft symphony of small noises that fills the tent. The blanket also has a weight to its sound, if such a thing can be said. The rustle is not light and high-pitched like the rustle of paper, but deeper, heavier, a sound that suggests substance and density. You associate this sound with comfort, with the end of the day, with the transition from wakefulness to sleep. When you lie down at night and pull the blanket over you, the rustle is the last sound you hear before the silence takes over, and it is a sound that tells your body it is time to rest. The process by which the blanket came to be is a long, slow chain of labor that stretches back across the country, across the seasons, to a farm where sheep grazed on a hillside somewhere in the green, rolling country to the north. Those sheep grew the wool that became this blanket, their fleeces thickening through the cold months and then shorn in the spring, when the weather turned warm and the sheep could go without their coats. The shearing was done by a man with strong arms and a set of sharp clippers, working his way through the flock, one animal at a time, the fleeces peeling away from the sheep in thick, creamy masses that were then rolled and packed and sent to the mill. At the mill, the wool was washed and carded, the fibers separated and aligned by machines that looked like enormous, bristling hairbrushes, and then it was spun into yarn on a spinning frame that twisted the fibers together into a continuous thread. The yarn was then woven on a loom, the shuttle flying back and forth with a rhythmic clatter, the fabric growing inch by inch until a long, continuous piece of cloth emerged, which was then cut into blanket-sized lengths. The blankets were dyed in vats of dark, earthy color, then fulled, a process that involved soaking and pounding the wool to tighten the weave and raise the nap. And finally they were dried, folded, packed, shipped, inventoried, and eventually handed to you in a quartermaster's depot on a rainy morning that you barely remember now. The weight of all that labor, all those hands, all those miles of transportation, is somehow present in the blanket, a ghostly trace of the human effort that went into its making. You do not think of this consciously, but you feel it, a sense of connection to something larger, a sense that this simple object carries within it a story of its own. The blanket serves many purposes beyond warmth. It is a pillow when folded, a ground cloth when spread on the grass, a windbreak when hung from a branch, a shade from the sun on a hot day. It has wrapped your spare clothes, cushioned your musket on a long march, covered your face against the dust of the road. It has been a tablecloth for meals and a cape in the rain, and a sling for a sore arm. The blanket is the most versatile item you own, the one thing you would keep if you had to abandon everything else, and its weight is a constant, reassuring presence wherever you go. Tonight, it is simply a blanket, doing its simple, original job, but even in this simplicity, it carries the memory of all its other roles, a quiet, accumulated usefulness that makes it more than just wool and thread. You settle deeper into the crate, letting your spine curve slightly, and the blanket shifts again, one edge slipping off your shoulder. You catch it with a slow, unhurried motion and pull it back up, tucking it under your chin. The wool is warm now, having absorbed your body heat, and it feels almost like a living thing, a gentle, patient animal that has curled up around you to share its warmth. The weight is especially noticeable on your shoulders, where the blanket's thickness is doubled because of the fold, and this pressure seems to push your shoulders down, releasing a tension you did not know you had. You take a deep breath, and the blanket expands slightly with the movement of your chest, then settles back as you exhale. The rhythm of your breathing, the slow, steady rise and fall, becomes a part of the blanket's own gentle motion, the two of you breathing together. A small draft finds its way under the tent flaps, and you feel the cool air touch your ankles, a sharp contrast to the warmth around your upper body. You tuck your feet back under the crate, and the blanket does not reach that far. But the coolness is not unpleasant. It reminds you that the blanket is doing its job, protecting the core of your body, preserving the heat that matters most. The contrast between the warm blanket and the cool air on your face is part of the comfort, a delicate balance of temperatures that makes the warmth feel even warmer by comparison. Your breath forms a faint, visible mist if you exhale sharply, but you are breathing slowly and deeply, and the mist is barely there, a ghost of vapor that vanishes as soon as it appears. The blanket has a different weight when it is wet, a heavy, sodden weight that soaks through to the skin and chills you to the bone. But tonight it is dry, and the weight is a dry weight, a clean, soft heaviness that is entirely pleasant. You think briefly of the times you have marched in the rain, with the blanket rolled and strapped to your pack, its weight then a burden, an extra load on already aching shoulders. But that burden is far away now, a memory from another time, and tonight the blanket is only a comfort, a gift you give yourself as the night deepens. You run your hands over its surface, smoothing the folds, and the wall responds with a faint, crackling static that makes the fine hairs on your arms stand up. The static sparkles invisibly in the dark, a tiny dry lightning, and then it is gone, leaving only the steady, woolen weight. You close your eyes and let the sensation of the blanket fill your awareness completely. The weight on your shoulders, the prickle on your neck, the warmth on your chest, the soft rustle in your ears, the faint, smoky smell in your nose, all these sensations blend into a single, unified experience of comfort. The blanket is a boundary between you and the world, a layer of protection that keeps the night at bay. The candle burns on, the ink dries, the crickets pulse, and you sit in the center of it all, wrapped in wool, wrapped in quiet, wrapped in the simple, profound peace of an ordinary night. The blanket holds you, and you hold the blanket, and the hours pass slowly, gently, without mark or measure, until the weight begins to feel less like a covering and more like an embrace. A constant, reassuring presence that will stay with you through the dark hours and into the first pale light of dawn. The letter rests on the board, its words complete for now, the ink dried to a soft matte black that will not smudge. You set the pen down beside the ink bottle, aligning it carefully so that it will not roll, and you stretch your fingers, feeling the small, pleasant ache of muscles that have been holding a shape for too long. The candle continues to burn, its flame a steady, golden presence that has become as familiar as your own breathing, and for a moment you simply sit and look at it, letting the quiet fill you up. Then, without any particular decision, you find yourself wanting to stand, to move, to step outside the warm cocoon of the tent and see what the night has become while you have been writing. It is not restlessness that moves you, but a gentle curiosity, a desire to feel the cool air on your face and to know that the world outside is still there, still turning, still holding the camp in its dark, quiet palm. You rise slowly, careful not to bump the crate or the candle. The board slides off your knees and onto the ground cloth with a soft, muffled thump, and you brace one hand on the edge of the crate to steady yourself as your legs unbend. Your body is stiff from sitting so long, and the movement sends a series of small, popping sensations through your knees and ankles, a quiet protest that fades as soon as you stand fully upright. The blanket slides from your shoulders as you rise, and you catch it with one hand, folding it loosely and draping it over the crate where it will wait for your return. The air inside the tent feels cooler now that the blanket is gone, the warmth of your body dissipating quickly, and you feel a slight shiver pass across your arms, a preview of the colder air outside. The candle flame wavers as you move, disturbed by the currents of air your body has pushed around, and you pause for a moment, waiting for it to steady. It does, returning to its quiet, upright burn, and you turn toward the tent flaps. The flaps are tied loosely, a simple loop of cord holding them together at the center, and you work the knot with slow, patient fingers, feeling the rough texture of the cord and the stiff, heavy fabric of the canvas. The knot comes undone with a soft, dry rustle, and the flaps part slightly, letting a thin blade of darkness appear between them. You grasp one edge and pull it aside, and the opening widens, revealing a narrow rectangle of night that is deeper and colder than the night inside the tent. The air that comes through is fresh and sharp, carrying the clean scent of damp grass and the faint, distant sweetness of the stream. You duck your head and step through, 1 foot at a time, and then you are outside, standing on the rough, packed earth of the camp, and the tent is behind you, a small, glowing shape that recedes into the background of your awareness. The first thing you notice is the coolness. The air outside is several degrees colder than the air inside the tent, and it washes over your face and hands with a crisp, clean bite that makes your skin tingle. You feel it on your bare feet first, because you have stepped out without your boots, and the grass underfoot is cool and damp with the condensation of the night. The blades of grass are soft and slightly springy, and they press up between your toes with a gentle, tickling sensation that is both pleasant and surprising. The earth beneath the grass is firm, packed hard by the passage of many feet, but there is a thin layer of loose soil on top that shifts slightly under your weight, a fine gritty powder that feels like walking on flour. You stand still for a moment, letting your body adjust to the new temperature, and you feel the coolness seep upward from the ground, through the soles of your feet, into your ankles, a slow, gradual chill that is not uncomfortable but simply present, a reminder that you are connected to the earth. Your eyes adjust slowly to the darkness. The candlelight inside the tent has made your pupils small, and for the first few seconds the world outside seems completely black, an unbroken wall of shadow. Then, gradually, the darkness begins to resolve into shapes and shades, and you realize that the night is not as dark as it first seemed. The stars are out, and they are doing their quiet, steady work of lighting the world with a silver-grey luminescence that is barely there but everywhere at once. You tilt your head back and look up, and the sky opens above you like a great inverted bowl, a dome of deep velvety black that is scattered with so many stars that they seem to blur together in places, forming rivers and clusters and faint, hazy patches of light. The stars are not uniform in brightness. Some are bright and sharp, like tiny pinpricks of white fire, while others are dim and faint, mere suggestions of light that you see only when you look slightly to the side. There are stars of different colors too, a subtle variation that you only notice if you look carefully. Some glow with a pale bluish-white light, others with a warmer golden hue, and a very few, the brightest ones, seem to flicker with a faint reddish twinkle that comes and goes. The Milky Way is visible tonight, a broad, irregular band of diffuse light that stretches across the sky from one horizon to the other, a river of stars so dense that individual points of light cannot be distinguished. It looks like a cloud that has been lit from within, a soft glowing mist that hangs motionless in the vast darkness, and if you let your gaze relax, you can almost imagine that you are looking into the depths of something infinite, something that goes on forever in every direction. The longer you look, the more stars you see, as if the sky is slowly revealing itself to you layer by layer. Faint stars that were invisible at first now emerge, and the spaces between the bright stars fill with a fine, granular texture of tiny, distant suns. You feel a sense of deep stillness looking at the sky, a stillness that is so complete it seems to press down on you like a gentle weight, and your breathing slows to match the steady, ancient rhythm of the heavens. The moon is a thin crescent tonight, a sliver of silver white that hangs low in the western sky, just above the dark line of the trees. It is so thin that you could cover it with your thumb if you held your hand up, and its light is soft and faint, a gentle glow that barely illuminates the ground, but that outlines the shapes of the camp with a delicate silver edge. The dark part of the moon, the part that is not lit by the sun, is faintly visible as a ghostly grey circle illuminated by the reflected light of the earth, a phenomenon you have seen many times but still find quietly beautiful. The crescent itself is sharp and clear, its two horns pointing upward and slightly to the left, and you can just make out the faint dark patches on its surface, the seas of ancient lava that form the face of the man in the moon. The moon does not move in any way you can see, but you know that if you were to stand here for an hour, it would sink gradually toward the trees, its arc carrying it down and away until it disappeared below the horizon, leaving the stars alone in the sky. For now it hangs there, patient and remote, casting just enough light to make the world navigable. With the moon and the stars as your guides, you lower your gaze and look out across the camp. The rows of tents stretch away in every direction, a grid of pale triangular shapes that recede into the darkness until they become indistinct blurs of grey. The tents are all the same, identical wedge-shaped shelters of canvas, and they stand in silent, orderly ranks like a congregation of quiet ghosts. The moonlight catches the canvas and gives it a soft, silver sheen, a faint luminescence that makes the tents look almost unreal, as if they are made of paper or thin cloth rather than heavy, weather-beaten canvas. The gaps between the tents are narrow, dark lanes that run straight and true until they curve out of sight over a low rise. There is no movement in the camp, no figures walking, no shadows shifting. Everything is still, wrapped in the deep, absolute stillness of the small hours when even the most restless sleepers have finally surrendered to their dreams. You notice the company street, the wide lane that runs in front of your tent, and you can see the faint parallel ruts of wagon wheels that have worn grooves in the earth. The ruts catch the moonlight in long silver lines that curve gently as the street bends toward the center of camp. The grass between the ruts is flattened and brown, and a few small stones gleam with a dull, wet reflection. Everything is quiet, not the quiet of an empty place, but the quiet of a place full of sleeping people, a silence that is thick and heavy, with the presence of hundreds of men breathing slowly under their blankets. The silence is not absolute. You can still hear the crickets, their steady, pulsing chorus unchanged from when you heard it inside the tent, and very faintly the distant rush of the stream, but these sounds seem to belong to the silence rather than interrupt it, a quiet foundation upon which the stillness rests. To the left, near the edge of the camp, a single flag hangs on its pole. The pole is a tall, slender pine trunk, stripped of its branches and planted firmly in the ground, and it rises up against the starry sky like a thin, dark line drawn with a ruler. The flag is furled, wrapped around itself so that it forms a long, narrow cylinder of fabric that hangs motionless from the top of the pole. There is not enough wind to lift it, but every so often a faint, almost imperceptible breeze stirs the air, and the flag responds with a lazy, gentle ripple that moves from top to bottom and then fades, the fabric settling back into stillness. The motion is so slow and so subtle that you might not see it if you were not watching carefully, but you are watching carefully, and you see the flag stir once, twice, a third time, each movement a small, silent signal that the air is alive, even in its stillness. The flag is a dark color, probably blue with a regimental emblem, but in the night it is just a shadow against the stars, a dark shape that belongs to the sky as much as the earth. Beyond the flag, near the tree line, you see a faint orange glow that pulses with a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat made of light. It is the embers of a cook fire, one of the many fires that burned earlier in the evening and was allowed to die down to a bed of coals. The fire must be some distance away, because the glow is small and faint, a single point of warm color in a world of silver and black. As you watch, a tiny flame leaps up from the embers, fed by a pocket of air or the last bit of fat wood, and then it subsides just as quickly, leaving the embers to their slow, patient smolder. The glow pulses again, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that seems to match your own breath, and you watch it for a long time, letting the small, distant fire become a kind of companion in the darkness. The smoke from the fire rises in a thin, invisible column, and you can smell it faintly, a sharp, acrid scent that reminds you of the evening meal and the warmth of a hearth. You take a few steps forward, your bare feet pressing into the cool grass, and you feel the ground change from the packed earth of the company street to the softer, more uneven soil near the tents. The grass is thicker here, and it brushes against your ankles with a soft, feathery touch. The sounds change as you move. The crickets seem louder now that you are away from the tent, their song rising and falling in waves that are almost hypnotic. You can hear, very faintly, the sound of a horse exhaling in its sleep, a long, fluttering breath that ends in a soft, grunting sigh. The picket line is somewhere ahead, a dark line of shapes that are the horses standing with their heads down, and one of them shifts its weight, the sound of a hoof stamping softly on the earth. The stamp does not disturb the others. They remain still, their bodies large and patient and calm. You stop walking and stand near the picket line, close enough to see the outline of the nearest horse, a dark shape with a long, curved neck and ears that twitch occasionally, as if it is listening to something in its dreams. The horse does not acknowledge you, but its presence is a warm, solid thing, a living anchor in the quiet sea of the night. You turn and look back toward your tent. The canvas glows faintly from within, a soft, diffuse patch of warm gold that marks the place where the candle still burns. The light is not bright, just a gentle suggestion of illumination that makes the tent stand out from its darker neighbors. You can see the gap in the flaps where you exited, and the thin line of light that spills out onto the grass, a narrow golden stripe that fades quickly into the darkness. The sight of the tent, small and glowing in the vastness of the night, fills you with a quiet sense of comfort. It is your small space, your temporary home, and it is waiting for you, warm and still, with the letter and the candle and the blanket. You stand for a while looking at the tent, and you feel no urgency to return. The night is large and calm, and you are a small part of it, a single, quiet observer, standing barefoot in the grass. You become aware of the sounds of your own body in the silence. Your heartbeat is a steady, soft thud that you can feel in your chest and, more faintly, in your temples. It keeps a slow, regular rhythm, a metronome that has been with you since before you were born and will stay with you until the very end. Your breathing is slow and deep, the cool air filling your lungs and then leaving in a long, gentle stream that you can see as a faint mist if you exhale through your mouth. The mist appears and then vanishes, a tiny, transient ghost that rises toward the stars. You can hear the soft, liquid sound of your own swallowing, the faint rustle of your shirt as your chest expands, the slight creak of a tendon in your ankle as you shift your weight. These sounds are tiny, intimate, the sounds of being alive in a quiet body on a quiet night. The owl calls again, the same soft, rounded hoot you heard from inside the tent, but now it is clearer, closer, as if the bird has moved to a tree just at the edge of the camp. The call is a single deep note that hangs in the air for a long moment and then fades, and after a pause, the answer comes from the other direction, just as it did before. The two owls trade their slow, patient conversation, and you listen, your head tilted slightly, your whole attention given to the sound. The calls are spaced out, one every 10 or 15 seconds, and the silence between them is as full and rich as the calls themselves. The owls are speaking to each other across the darkness, across the sleeping camp, across the quiet fields and the whispering stream, and their words are simple and ancient and completely indifferent to human ears. You feel a sense of peace listening to them, a sense that the world continues in its old, wild ways even as you stand here in your wool uniform with your letter half written and your candle burning. Eventually, you feel the coolness of the air begin to seep deeper into your body, and a small shiver passes through your shoulders. It is not an urgent shiver, not the kind that demands immediate warmth, but a gentle reminder that your bare feet are cold and the blanket is waiting inside. You take one last look at the sky, the stars still bright and countless, the moon a fraction lower than it was, the Milky Way still a faint, glowing river. You look at the flag, still stirring with its slow, lazy ripples, and at the distant embers, still pulsing with their quiet orange light. You look at the rows of tents, the sleeping horses, the dark line of the trees, and you feel a great slow wave of gratitude for this moment, for this quiet, for this small peaceful interlude in the long, unspooling thread of your life. Then you turn and walk back to your tent, your bare feet making soft, whispering sounds on the grass. You duck through the opening, and the warm, familiar air of the tent wraps around you like a gentle embrace. The candle is still burning, its flame exactly as you left it, steady and golden and patient. The letter is still on the board, the pen beside it, the ink bottle corked and waiting. You reach back and pull the tent flaps closed, the canvas rustling softly as the gap narrows and then disappears, and you retie the cord with the same slow, careful fingers that undid it. The tent feels smaller now in a good way, a contained space that holds the warmth of the candle and the scent of the ink and the quiet that you have made here. You settle back onto the crate, pulling the blanket up over your shoulders, and you sit for a moment, letting the sensations of the outside world fade and merge with the sensations of the inside. The coolness on your skin gradually warms, the night sky recedes into memory, and the tent once again becomes the whole world, a small golden space at the center of the vast, dark silence. The letter is nearly finished now. You look down at the paper on the board, at the lines of dark ink that have flowed from your pen over the course of this long, quiet evening, and you see that there is only a small space left at the bottom of the sheet, a pale rectangle of blank paper that awaits the final words. The candle burns beside you, its flame a little lower than it was, the pool of liquid wax wider and deeper, the rim of cool tallow built up into a low, uneven wall around the wick. The tent is still, filled with the layered smells of ink and canvas and wool, and the faint, savory warmth of the burning tallow, and the sounds of the camp outside have faded into a deep, uninterrupted hush that seems to press gently against the canvas walls. You dip the pen one more time, the nib making its soft, familiar click against the glass rim, and you wipe away the excess ink with a slow, careful motion that has become as natural as breathing. The nib hovers above the paper for a moment, and then you begin to